Chapter 66. Ice rain was falling, diluting the smell of blood in the holy city. Alicia was holding her sword, gasping for breath. This was not the first time she participated in the Battle of Hermes, but she never thought that the new holy city might be lost one day. The city wall was completely destroyed. Alicia had never seen such a terrible monster. A huge insect-like hybrid beast sprang out from the ground, its body stuck to the glacial cliff, its bony claws embedded in the wall like barbs. Step by step, it climbed to the top of the city wall, but its body was still not completely out of the ground. If it was just a huge body, it would have been fine, but no one expected that the monster would unexpectedly open its bloody mouth and spit out a large number of hybrid demonic beasts. The city wall suddenly burst into an uproar. Originally, the team was still in good order, but after being attacked by the demonic beasts, Alicia's Judgment Army advance camp was also separated. She could only watch helplessly as her comrades were swallowed up by the demonic beasts, but she was powerless to do anything. Warm human blood mixed with the monster's black blood, flowing along the cracks on the stone floor. With the sound of the retreat horn, the holy city's catapults were also launched. Granite blocks as high as half a person fell from the sky, completely ignoring the fact that there were still a lot of their own people and the kingdom's army. Alicia could only remember that a boulder had hit Captain Ducato, who was guarding her side. When she got up from the ground, she saw that Ducato was embedded in the cracked stone floor along with his armor. His body was like a piece of wrinkled parchment, and his intestines were flowing out of the crack in his abdomen. His blood was steaming hot and formed a small puddle under his body. If I hadn't jumped before the boulder fell, I'm afraid I would have ended up like him, she thought. As for how she finally broke through the encirclement and retreated to the bottom of the city wall, Alicia couldn't remember it clearly. Screams and curses could be heard everywhere. Everyone was waving their weapons in a frenzy. She didn't know whether they were fighting with the demonic beasts or their companions. A team of more than 100 judges, including herself, only 12 people survived. What should we do next, Captain? Captain Alicia. Alicia suddenly came back to her senses. That's right, according to the regulations of the Army of Judges, if the captain dies in battle, the deputy captain should take over the captain's position and lead the team to continue fighting. She bit her lips until the taste of iron filled her mouth. We'll go to the north gate of the holy city. If the demonic beasts want to attack the new holy city, they must pass through there. This order meant giving up all the residential areas between the city wall and the inner city, but she had no other choice. There was no place more important than the center of the church, the Hermes Cathedral. There was one more thing that she didn't say. If the glaciers and cliffs couldn't stop these monsters, what could she and the remaining 11 people do? Perhaps today was the day she would dedicate herself to heaven. May you be merciful. She prayed in her heart and shouted, the army of judges will never give up. Let's go. The army of judges will never give up. The others shouted in unison. The 12 of them formed a column and jogged towards the north gate. The sounds of fighting in the city wall area gradually weakened and eventually disappeared in the wind and rain. After arriving at the north gate, Alicia saw that a lot of army of judges had gathered in front of the drawbridge. It seemed that everyone had the same idea, which made her feel a little better. But at this critical moment, the drawbridge was lowered. Alicia frowned and walked in front of a handsome warrior wearing the presiding judge's standard red robe. She clenched her fist and saluted, Presiding Judge, I am the captain of the 4th team of the advance battalion, Alicia Quinn. I am Tucker Thor, the person in charge of the defense of the North Gate. Thank you for your hard work. The man nodded and said, we have set up a first aid center behind the North Gate. If there are any wounded in your team, you can send them there. Sir, I don't understand. Why don't you raise the drawbridge at this time? The demonic beasts on the city wall can swarm in at any time. We must ensure that the inner city is not lost. Calm down, Captain. I know that you and your team members are not afraid of sacrifice, but unnecessary sacrifice is meaningless. The church is still far from the last moment. He reached out and wiped the rain off his forehead. Go to the assembly point and wait for orders. If you run out of cold pills, remember to ask the quartermaster for more. Hearing the presiding judge's words, Alicia realized that she was freezing. After leaving the battlefield, her body was covered in sweat and the cold rainwater, almost freezing her whole body in ice. She couldn't help but shiver when the biting cold wind blew on her face. She took out the sheepskin bag from her underwear pocket and shook it in her palm, but only some sticky liquid flowed out. It seemed that he had accidentally crushed the pill during the battle. She sighed and raised her head, only to find a brownish-red cold-expelling pill in front of her. "Eat mine first," Tucker Thor smiled at her. "You can return it to me later." Alicia didn't hesitate. She took the pill, bit it, and swallowed it. "Maybe we won't have the chance to eat this thing again." "Yes, that's not bad." Tucker unexpectedly nodded in agreement. "This thing is really disgusting." As soon as he finished speaking, a strong fishy smell rushed up from Alicia's stomach. Even the battlefield full of corpses would not emit such a disgusting smell. She felt that what she ate was not a pill, but a mixture of rotten flesh and blood. The unbearable numbness continued to spread from her abdomen to her whole body. The cold suddenly faded, followed by a burning warmth flowing through her blood vessels. Her body temperature gradually recovered. The frozen sweat began to fall again. The top of her head emitted a burst of white steam, and her numb toes regained their feeling. But not today. Seeing her eat the cold pill, the presiding judge waved his hand. "The God's punishment army is coming from the cathedral. The demonic beasts can't pass through the north gate. Take your people and go to the assembly point. Remember to check their pills. Don't be like you, only to find that they are gone when you need them." The God's punishment army was the church's most elite army. Alicia had heard about it for a long time, but she had never seen it with her own eyes. But, even if the God's punishment army was as powerful as the rumors said, they were still human beings. With this body, no matter how much they trained, it would be impossible to easily defeat a large group of hybrid demonic beasts. But since the presiding judge had said so, she had no choice but to leave the north gate with her 11 team members and go to the assembly point in the west. There were already hundreds of retreating judges gathered here. They stood in the rain in twos and threes, letting the rain fall on their cheeks. Some even sat directly on the ground, looking listless. Only a small number of people were still lined up in a neat line, waiting for the enemy to appear at any time. If it was a few days ago, Alicia would definitely stand up and scold them, but now, she was also at a loss. In order to build this new holy city, countless compatriots had died here. It could be said that every brick and tile here was condensed with the blood of believers and the judges. The bishop often said that occupying the Hermes was tantamount to owning the kingdom of God. But today, it seemed that the kingdom of God would fall into the hands of the devil's minions. "The demonic beasts are coming." Someone shouted, "Prepare to meet the enemy." Alicia forced herself to raise her sword. She stared at the rapidly approaching shadow in the sky and shouted, "For Hermes." Chapter 67. But the expected final battle did not happen. One of them walked in front of the female warrior and pressed down on the hilt of her sword. "Stand back." His voice was not loud, but it was clear and powerful. Alicia noticed that he was one of the members of the team that was still in an orderly formation. He was wearing the commander's badge on his arm. "The God's punishment army is coming." She turned her head and saw a team of tall warriors coming out from the north gate. They were wearing bright armor, which reflected the silver luster of the rain. They had red cloaks on their backs and different weapons in their hands. Some were holding shields and swords, and some were holding sickles or iron axes. After crossing the suspension bridge, they did not regroup, but spread out and directly faced the incoming demonic beasts. What kind of strategy is this? It's simply nonsense. In the face of the hybrid demonic beasts that are far stronger and faster than human beings, only by maintaining the formation and gathering everyone's strength can they win. Looking at their current posture, does it mean that they want to fight alone? Moreover, let the God's punishment army fight alone, while I just watch from the sidelines. We have to support them. No, the man shook his head, his face somewhat gloomy. We just need to watch. If we rush forward, we will only drag them down. Drag them down? Alicia angrily stared at the man. Could it be that she was wrong, that this man was just a coward? She clenched the hilt of her sword, ready to bypass him and join the battle. Although she was full of confusion about the future of the new holy city, at this moment in the face of the enemy, the only thing she could do was to die on the battlefield. Before she could take 2 steps, the female warrior saw an unbelievable scene. A flying mutant swooped down from the sky. Its appearance was as terrible as the messenger of hell. It had huge wings covered with gray feathers, and when fully spread, it could reach up to 12 feet. Its head was like a bird, but it had a pair of goat's horns. Its claws were sharp enough to cut into a warrior's chest armor. Falling vertically from a high altitude was their usual attack method, which was hidden and extremely difficult to defend. Even if you held a heavy shield with both hands, you would still be knocked down. The huge impact force would shatter the arm bones of the shield holder, and the chest cavity would be flattened. It was almost a death situation. The only way to deal with this was to roll away when the mutant was about to hit the ground. That was the only way to avoid this dangerous attack. But the God's Punishment Army did not dodge. A silver-armored warrior took a stance to face the enemy. The moment the mutant rushed in front of him, he stretched out his hands and used his palms to block the opponent's claws. The impact force was so strong that it made a sound like the explosion of a snow barrel. A cloud of mist rose from him and the monster, and the armor squeaked. He bent his right leg and straightened his left leg. His body was stretched into a straight line, and the Xenogeniac was unable to crush him at the moment. The other warrior aimed at the flying mutant and threw a javelin. The speed of the javelin was so fast that all Alicia could see was a flash of silver light. The javelin accurately pierced through the monster's head, smashing it into pieces. The silver-armored warrior tossed the still-twitching corpse to the ground. His arm was bent unnaturally. It was clear that he had not escaped unscathed from the attack. The bones in his arm had been broken. But he calmly pulled out the axe from his waist and started to kill the other demonic beasts. Alicia couldn't believe her eyes. Hundreds of God's Punishment Army warriors rushed into the swarm of demonic beasts. Their red cloaks were like a torrent of blood, forcibly blocking the enemy's advance. She now understood what the commander meant by drag. These warriors had the ability to fight 10 enemies at once. Their strength, agility, and reflexes were comparable to demonic hybrids. No, they were even stronger. Ordinary demonic beasts were powerless in front of them. That's amazing. Alicia felt a heartfelt joy. With this group of brave and powerful warriors, the fall of Hermes Cathedral would be impossible. Ah, by the way, I haven't asked for your name. My name is Alicia Quinn, captain of the Army of Judges. You seem to have long known the fighting ability of the God's Punishment Army. The man glanced at her, his eyes as cold as ice rain. He didn't tell her his name, but said in a low voice, "My brother is a member of the God's Punishment Army." "It looks like we won," Bishop Maine said while holding a telescope on the top floor of the cathedral. This was the highest point of the new holy city. Using the telescope tools of the fjord's sea merchants, they could overlook most of the battlefield. "Stop the catapults, the God's Punishment Army is about to attack the city. Isn't victory expected?" Another person said. He was wearing the same golden bishop robe as Maine, but his voice was much older. "The key is that the armies of the 4 kingdoms are finished. Yes, in this way, their border defense line is useless," the last person said. She was the youngest of the 3, about 30 years old, and the only woman among the 3 archbishops. More than 5,000 well-equipped and well-trained regular soldiers and nearly 1,000 knight. Even if they were immediately replenished, it would take 4 to 5 years. She let out a groan and smacked her lips. It's really a wonderful plan. But in order to achieve this goal, we have also lost a lot of judges. They are the backbone of the church. Maine sighed. If it wasn't for this plan being the fastest to achieve results, I really don't want to throw them into this purgatory." The old man stroked his beard and said, "We have no other choice. The wasteland beasts have appeared, just like what is written in the Holy Book. We don't have much time left. If we can't unify the whole continent and concentrate our strength, we will only be greeted with destruction." "Destruction is actually not bad," the woman said with a frivolous smile. "Humans are greedy, vicious, and mercenary. Under the banner of righteousness, they do more terrible things than the demonic beasts. Maybe even the devils in hell are much kinder than us." "Heather." The old man was so angry that his beard trembled. "Your remarks are simply outrageous. Do you want to violate the will of God?" "You don't need to worry about this, Lord Tayfun." Heather shrugged, her face full of disapproval. "The person in charge of the arbitration tribunal is me, not you. Besides, did God ask us to survive? How do you know that he doesn't care more about the devils?" "You." "Enough. Tayfun, Heather." Maine said in a displeased tone, "That's it for today. I will report the situation to the Pope. You can go and complete your own tasks." After the two left, Maine stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the north. Behind the impassable mountain range was the land of eternal winter covered with ice and snow, and further west was the barbarian land. That was the beginning of everything. He knew that what Bishop Tayfun said was right. Scourge was too rare. They needed to be loyal to the church, and at the same time have a strong willpower to carry out the transformation. After nearly 100 years of accumulation, the church had accumulated less than 1,000 people. If they wanted to fight against the demons, their numbers were far from enough. But the whole north could only provide so many God's punishment army. If they wanted more warriors, they had no choice but to unify the whole continent. Of course, what Bishop Heather said was equally correct. She served as the church's arbitrator, and had judged tens of thousands of villains and witches. Whether it was those villains or witches, the most ferocious of them all couldn't compare to today's deliberately staged Pyrrhic victory. The higher one's position in the church, the more clearly they could feel that God was neither good nor evil, nor good or evil. How do you know that he doesn't care more about the devils? Thinking of Heather's words, Maine couldn't help but laugh. Perhaps only she could make Tayfun speechless. He thought, but God neither protects the world, nor cares for the devils. Chapter 68. A funeral was being held in a wasteland southwest of Border Town. It was not appropriate to call it a wasteland. Nobody knew when, but this piece of land had been surrounded by a low wall made of rubble. The top of the wall was covered with a thick layer of snow. From a distance, it looked as if it was plated with a layer of silver. Although it could be crossed in one step, when Vanner saw it, he could not help but think of the border wall. They were all the same color and the same shape. He had only heard of this ceremony from traveling merchants. When a great noble or a member of the royal family died, the deceased's family would gather at the cemetery, play sad music, accept others' condolences, and finally bury the coffin underground. The nobler the status, the greater the sound. Even the dead were more glorious than the living. At that time, he enviously thought, what if the people of Border Town died? They would dig a hole in the concealing forest and fill it. He did not know whether the demonic beasts dug up the corpses and ate them when the months of the demons came. For the residents of Border Town, death was not strange at all. Especially during the winter when they went to Longsong's stronghold to take refuge, everyone huddled in the shacks of the slums, dying of hunger and cold, dying of diseases and injuries. That was the norm. No one had time to grieve. It was better to wait for dawn to go to the center of the city to beg for a piece of bread. But today, His Highness unexpectedly held a funeral for a soldier. It was said that when he was chasing a hybrid demonic beast, he was unfortunately pushed to the ground and half of his head was bitten off. Vanner knew this unlucky guy. He was also an old face in the old district. He did not have a name, everyone called him Aji. He had a wife and 2 children. The older one seemed to be 6 years old, and the younger one was just able to walk. In normal times, this family would definitely be finished, and the woman could find another man to live with, but who would be willing to take 2 burdens? Either he threw the two little guys to the roadside and let them fend for themselves, or he raised them and went to the bar to solicit sex, and finally died of a variety of strange diseases. But His Highness seemed to really intend to fulfill his promise when he recruited the militia. The dead would not only receive full pay, but also an extra compensation. What was it called? Vanner thought for a moment. Ah, yes, the pension. And the money was actually as much as 5 golden dragon. Apart from that, they would also be given a certain amount of food and charcoal every month. This meant that even if Aji's wife did not go out to work, she could still raise the 2 children and survive. Alright, these seemingly beautiful words might just be words of comfort, but the golden dragon was real. He saw His Royal Highness hand over the pension to the chief knight, and then the knight passed it to Aji's wife. Damn it, why did he suddenly feel envious of Aji? No, Van shook his head again and again, trying to get rid of these stupid thoughts. He didn't want his wife to die, and she was likely to be someone else's wife. After the money was distributed, His Highness gave a short speech, but Vanner heard it clearly. In particular, the phrase, "We will always remember the sacrifices made to protect our loved ones and the innocent," made him feel a surge of warmth in his heart. So that's how it is, Roland thought. It's no wonder that in addition to bread and silver wolves recently, I always feel that I have something else to pursue. At least this winter, they can survive by relying on their own hands, rather than the charity of Longsong Stronghold. The last step was to bury him. Aji's coffin was placed in the dug pit, and the chief knight asked everyone to line up. Every member of the militia, whether official or substitute, took turns to fill the grave with soil with a shovel. Everyone was very familiar with lining up, so more than 200 people immediately lined up into 4 columns. When it was Vanner's turn, he suddenly felt that the shovel became a little heavy, and the gazes of the surrounding militia members made his every movement slow down. When he stood aside, he passed this feeling to the next person to cover the grave. Aji's tombstone was a pure white rectangular stone, and Vanner did not know any of the words on it. Moreover, he was not the first person to live in this wasteland. Next to Aji, there was an identical tombstone, the top of which was covered with snow. When everyone left one after another, Vanner saw Brian, the new captain of the 2nd Militia, slowly pouring a pot of ale on the tombstone. If this is my final home, it doesn't look bad, he couldn't help thinking. Your Highness, on the way back to the castle, Carter suddenly said, "You did this, is it inappropriate?" No, he thought for a moment and finally shook his head, "I don't know. I just feel that no one has ever treated the recruited subjects like this. They have no title, no family background, and they don't even have a surname or a name. But you still feel good about it, right?" Roland smiled. Of course, he knew how influential this would be to Carter, who also fought and protected. When people began to think about who they were fighting for and why they were fighting, there would be unimaginable changes in the ranks. For Carter, when honor was no longer the privilege of the nobles, but when those commoners who had nothing, through his training and teaching, could also gain honor by defending their homes, this doubled sense of achievement was simply indescribable. Of course, a public funeral was just a beginning. Roland thought that he still had many ways to enhance the collective sense of honor, such as making military flags, military songs, setting up heroic examples, and so on. There was no kind of spirit that could be created out of nothing. Only by persisting in this practice day after day, constantly instilling ideas, would it gradually become effective. In order to ensure the reliable operation of the aftermath system, he even arranged a 3-person team consisting of himself, City Hall, and the militia to complete the follow-up food and charcoal distribution. The further he went, the more Roland felt his shoulders become heavy. Border Town really lacked too much. It seemed that the mining industry and the people's livelihood were on the right track, and the food reserves were sufficient. So far, no one had starved or frozen to death. In other towns, this was already a miracle. Even in King's City of Greycastle, many refugees or orphans would be eliminated by the winter every year. But what he wanted was far more than this. The City Hall's operating load had reached its limit. Relying on Barav, the minister's assistant, and his dozen or so apprentices, all of Border Town's financial and administrative management were supported. If he wanted to further expand the department, he would have to recruit some management staff. He had also asked Barav if there were any proud students or colleagues left in King's City, but the answer he got was a bucket of cold water. Even if there were, they would not be willing to come. Your Highness, do you really know how bad your reputation in King's City is? Well, it does sound very reasonable. He thought gloomily. Back to the castle backyard, Nightingale emerged from the fog and gave Vendi, who was standing outside the wooden shed, a warm hug. Lightning was circling around the incomplete steam boring machine. When she saw Roland, she immediately shouted that she wanted to assemble this machine, which was rumored to be able to move on its own. Chapter 69. 4 days later, in the backyard of the North Slope mine. 2 deep holes were dug on the ground in the yard. Each hole was round, narrow at the top and wide at the bottom. The inner diameter of the front was about 20 centimeters, and the inner diameter of the back was expanded to 26 centimeters. These holes were the molds that Roland intended to use to cast the cannon embryos. The inner walls of the holes had been baked by Anna, and the soil on the surface had been sintered into a whole body, like a shell. The lower the chamber was to obtain a better quality tube wall, and the higher it was, the more scum and bubbles there would be. The dimensions of all the holes were calculated from the cannonball. He roughly remembered that the so-called 6-pound cannons and 8-pound cannons were named after the weight of the cannonball. So, he first cast a few 12-pound iron balls, and then calculated the inner diameter of the mold according to the diameter of the iron balls and the thickness of the cannon tube. In the absence of measuring tools, Roland simply set his own standard. He cut off a piece of iron bar as wide as the nail of his ring finger and set it as the basic unit, 1 centimeter. Then, he made other iron bars of different sizes and engraved segmented lines on them. The diameter of the 12-pound iron balls was about 12 centimeters, and he set the thinnest part of the tube wall at 4 centimeters. In order to prevent the chamber from exploding, the thickness of the rear chamber was expanded to 7 centimeters, and the inner diameter of the mold was calculated from that. As for the length, although he knew that cannons could be doubled in diameter, he only had an impression of the main cannons of battleships and main station tanks. As for the antique front-loading cannon, he really didn't know. Considering that the shorter the barrel, the lighter the weight, and the more materials would be saved, Roland waved his hand and took a value of 1.5 meters. If the test results were not satisfactory, he could adjust it later. When the cannon was first invented, the wooden core was surrounded by iron bars and iron powder, and then reinforced with iron hoops. Finally, the core in the chamber was burned, just like a wooden storage barrel. Of course, Roland knew that this kind of cannon could easily leak air and explode, so he directly used the hole casting process and the boring machine to drill the holes. For a steam boring machine, there was no essential difference in the difficulty of drilling a 6-pound cannon or a 12-pound cannon. Based on the idea that caliber was justice, he naturally chose a 12-pound cannon with a larger muzzle and a thicker barrel. If he went any higher, it would not be easy to use as a field cannon. As for the weight of the shell, it didn't matter whether it was a lead ball or an iron ball, as long as it could shoot out. After all, he was learning from history and not playing with replicas. Let's begin. Roland took a deep breath and said to Anna. The latter nodded, grabbed a piece of steel ingot, and hung it above the hole. The green flame ignited, and the steel ingot quickly turned red, then melted, forming a small waterfall of molten steel that flowed into the cave. The surface of the molten steel was reddish-orange, and the inner core turned incandescent, so bright that it was difficult to look at it directly. In order to protect the witch's eyesight, Roland also deliberately set up a cushion at the entrance of the cave. She only needed to determine the position in advance and lean her arm on the cushion, so that she wouldn't have to stare at the molten steel to see if it flowed into the cave. These steel ingots were slowly accumulated during normal times. Anna alone could not start the era of large-scale steelmaking, but a small batch production was not a problem for her. After the most difficult to achieve temperature was solved, the method of frying steel could produce better quality steel. This was also the reason why Roland dared to set the size of the cannon barrel. Compared to pig iron and bronze cannon barrels, steel cannon barrels were obviously more durable. Even if the size was wrong, the cannon would not easily explode. The molten steel gradually rose, and the remaining steel ingots were also rapidly decreasing. Roland could not help but feel a little heartache. In the end, when would he be able to build a bunch of chimneys and blast furnaces in his territory, and smelt an endless supply of steel? For a long time, the output of steel was one of the standards to measure the strength of the great powers, and now he personally felt it. After filling the 2 molds, Anna's cheeks became bright red. Roland took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the sweat on the tip of her nose. At first, Anna showed some resistance, but now she obediently stayed motionless, closing her eyes and letting Roland do whatever he wanted. Under the reflection of the molten steel, her bangs were dyed red, and her soft neck made people want to bite it. When he looked down from above, the other side's slender clavicle that was exposed through the collar would enter his field of view. When he was close, he could also smell the bursts of delicate fragrance coming from her body. Ahem, all right. Roland put away the handkerchief and at the same time, withdrew his restless emotions. Let's call it a day. Well done, I will ask the kitchen to reward you with an extra black pepper steak for dinner. Not now, he thought. If he did that, he would inevitably be suspected of taking advantage of her. Wait until she really gets her freedom. Anna opened her eyes. Although the sweat had been wiped away, her face seemed to be redder than before. She nodded at Roland and replied softly, yes. In the next few days, Roland went back and forth between the castle and the North Slope mine. In addition to the cannon barrel, he also needed to make a sufficient number of boring tools. This drilling tool was made in a similar way to the cannon barrel, and its diameter was exactly the same as the shell. After taking it out of the mold, Anna heated it again and used the iron hammer to shape it. It was very different from the ordinary spiral knife in shape. At first glance, it looked like a blunt iron rod. The only difference was that there was a gap at the top for discharging metal debris. Finally, it was quenching to improve the hardness of the boring tool. Unlike the high-precision drills of modern boring machines, Roland only needed an iron rod that could drill holes. Taking into account the high wear rate, he and Anna made 5 simple boring tools in a week. Before this, the steam boring machine had fully proved its ability. The production of pig iron barrels rapidly increased from 2 per month to 10 per day. When everything was ready, the cannon embryos were dug out from the pit by the miners. After cleaning the surface scum, they were carried to the carriage and transported to the blacksmith shop. These 2 cannon embryos almost consumed all the steel that Roland had accumulated. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were priceless treasures. During the transportation, the prince ordered Carter and 2 knights to be responsible for the whole process, which made the chief knight feel that it was a bit unnecessary. Who would steal such a heavy thing? The blacksmiths flattened and polished the surface of the cannon embryos according to the prince's request. After the grinding stones were finished, they were immediately sent to the castle's backyard. At this time, the 2 round solid steel rods were dark gray, exuding a thick metallic luster. Roland couldn't wait to replace the boring tool, and together with Carter, they fixed the cannon embryos in place, so that the top of the boring tool was just in the center of the steel rods. In the face of this historic moment, Roland pulled the valve of the steam engine. The boring tool began to run slowly, and it didn't take long for it to rise to a stable speed. Enter! The prince shouted. Chapter 70. Groundhog. Cole anxiously looked out of the window. Although the snow never stopped in this ghostly place, and the sky was as dirty and gray as a sheet that his grandmother hadn't washed for years, he still had another way to tell the time. That was the training of the militia. As long as the weather allowed, they would run through the square in the center of the town every morning, 8 o'clock. Before the months of the demons, these idiots had been doing this, and now they were still doing it. Don't these people know that the most important thing to do in winter is to save their strength? When it's time to escape, I'm afraid you'll have to beg God to give you 2 more legs. But thanks to these idiots, he was able to determine the approximate time to leave. Yes, he had to escape from this demonic town. Although His Royal Highness the Second Prince had ordered him to lurk in Border Town and observe the movements of the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, and send the information back to Valencia, he didn't want to stay there for even a moment longer. He was afraid that in another half a month, he would become a devil's sacrifice together with the residents. This was by no means an alarmist. Since the beginning of winter, there had been an endless stream of strange things happening here. Other people might not have noticed it, but this was not surprising. Most of the townspeople were ignorant country bumpkins. In addition to eating, they didn't care about anything, even God was not in their eyes. But he was different, he was Groundhog Cole. Spying and stealing information were his unique skills, so His Highness Timothy had asked him to do this kind of thing. The city wall that broke through the ground overnight, and the iron rod that could knock down demonic beasts, of course, these were not as amazing as his most amazing discovery. The dignified fourth prince of the kingdom was actually raising witches in public. God is merciful, is there anything more exaggerated than this? If the prince wasn't controlled by the devil, he simply couldn't think of any other explanation. Even if the prince wanted to have a taste of the witches, he could do whatever he wanted in the castle. This was not the first time that Cole had heard of nobles keeping witches. These witches could be wantonly played with, and even if they were dead, no one would care about them, which was very suitable for some nobles with strange tastes. This was not his delusion, he had seen it with his own eyes. Following the principle that he would work for whoever paid him, Cole would stroll around the city walls every day when the snow was not heavy. There, he would often see the figure of Prince Roland. Originally, he had been wondering what made this incompetent playboy prince have the courage to stay in Border Town, instead of running back to Longsong's stronghold. Now he completely understood, Roland Wimbledon had already been replaced by the devil. He saw with his own eyes that the city wall was broken by a huge demonic beast, and the devil killed it with a thunderclap. Then, the demonic beasts that swarmed over were engulfed by the hellfire summoned by a witch. In the end, the witch threw herself into the arms of the prince, and no one in the militia raised any questions. After that, he heard other rumors from his neighbors, saying that there was a witch with healing abilities. What about his son's injury being cured? What about the old lady who slipped and broke her leg being sent over? What blasphemy! Being healed by a witch? What was the difference between that and accepting the demon's corruption? What made Cole make up his mind was 2 days ago, when he saw a witch fly out of the prince's castle, circle around the castle twice and then fly back. The priest of the church often said that after a witch was tempted by the devil, she could only get one kind of power. But he had at least seen flames and flying, plus the rumors of a healing witch, which meant that in this small town, there were actually 3 witches. There was no doubt that the devil had turned the Lord's castle into a gathering place for demons, and the residents here were gradually under their control. He had to escape as soon as possible. Anyway, he held the secret to the rapid construction of the border wall in his hands. As long as he gave the stolen alchemy powder to the second prince, he would not only not punish him, but would also reward him. The more Cole thought about it, the more he regretted not returning to Longsong's stronghold with the evacuated nobles. Now, if he wanted to leave this place, it was definitely not feasible to go by land. The continuous winter snow would cover all the roads. His only chance was to use Willowtown's merchant ship to leave by water. According to Cole's observation, on the first day of every month, Willowtown's ship would come with food, and after 4 to 6 hours of unloading and loading, it would set sail and leave the dock. He had to take advantage of this time to sneak onto the ship, otherwise he could only wait until next month. And today was the first day of the month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. At this moment, Cole heard the familiar slogan. Outside the window, a group of young men wearing brown leather armor ran by in high spirits. If he hadn't already seen through the devil's plot, he would definitely have been deceived by this scene of youthful vigor. It's time to go, he thought. Putting on his fur coat, Cole tightened his belt and went out of the cabin. A neighbor was collecting dried fish outside the house, and when he saw him, he greeted him, going out so early? I have to say, although the lord of Border Town was controlled by the devil, the lives of these ignorant people had become a lot better, and they even dared to hang dried fish outside the house. You know, if people were extremely hungry, even if it was frozen as hard as a stone, they would still be able to swallow it. But Cole didn't have time to respond to him. He looked at the militia disappearing in the west, and went straight in the direction of the dock. The residents here all thought of him as Iron Ore's younger brother, who came from Fallen Dragon Ridge to visit his relatives. Of course, it was all nonsense. Before killing Iron Ore, he asked the other's name and address, and then disguised himself as his younger brother and lurked here. As for the identity he made up, he didn't care whether those idiots believed him or not. The snow on the stone road had been swept a few days ago, and now it was almost over the top of his shoes. He maintained a constant pace, trying to save as much strength as possible. As for the footprints he left behind, he wasn't worried. At most in a day, the snow would cover them again. Maybe when he arrived at Valencia, they would still be in the dark. When he arrived at the dock, Cole saw the long-awaited sailboat from Willow Town. Sacks of wheat were being carried out from the cabin, and there were guards standing guard around them. He touched his pocket. Inside there were 2 golden dragon and 16 silver royals. That was all he had. There were 6 guards, but the silver wolf probably wouldn't be interested, and the golden dragon wasn't enough, so he had to focus on the porters. The stacked goods provided a blind spot, and knocking out a porter and replacing him was what he was good at. If he could get on board, he believed that under the temptation of the golden dragon, the captain would most likely hide him and take him away. Just as Cole was about to act, he heard a shout behind him. He knew something was wrong, and turned around, only to see several militia members rushing in his direction, and there were also people closing in on him. Obviously, he had been surrounded. Seeing that there was no hope of escape, Cole immediately raised his hands and knelt on the ground. In his line of work, one must not stubbornly resist. As long as he spat out all the information about the employer, he would generally be safe and sound, or they would hire him back at a higher price. How much money you get, how much you do was also Cole's principle. Chapter 71. In addition to the fireplace, Barav also placed a mahogany lampstand on the table. The top of the lampstand was divided into 4 branches. The middle branch was the highest, and the other 3 branches formed a triangle around it. There was a candle burning on each branch, and the quiet blooming light was like a resplendent mountain peak. The room was filled with the fragrance of pine oil, like the sweet and damp smell of rotten wood, making people sleepy. But in Border Town, he could not ask for more. Elegance had nothing to do with this poor place. Having a house that could shelter him from the wind and rain was already very good, not to mention that he now had a large number of houses. His office was located in a courtyard not far from the castle. It was also the location of the former lord's city hall. Of course, when the lord left, he took all his men with him. Now, this place had become the assistant minister's domain. The rustling sound of writing and the whistling cold wind outside the window from time to time formed 2 different worlds. In front of a wooden table full of books and old scrolls, Barav was writing at a very fast speed. On both sides of him, there was also a low log table. Usually no one used it, only used to place manuscripts. When needed, he would summon his disciples to the low table, to sort out information or write the first draft of a document. The candles on the lampstand had been changed 3 times. In addition to getting up to change them, Barav never stopped writing. Time was an extremely precious thing for him. There was still a stack of documents waiting for him to deal with, and the financial expenditure proposed by His Highness also needed to be carefully reviewed. Now Barav worked for an average of 10 hours a day, but he did not feel tired at all. On the contrary, here, he could freely display his skills, and his body had endless energy. This is the taste of power, he thought. He no longer had to follow behind his mentor, all the apprentices listened to him, and no one dared to hinder him. As long as he completed His Highness' orders, he could control the specific process. It would be perfect if the prince's orders could be a little more normal. Barav slightly regretfully smacked his lips. For example, in front of him was a document stamped with Roland's personal seal. It was written that he needed to send people to Willow Town to recruit management staff and buy a 2-masted sailboat. The second one was followed by a special note: considering the price, we don't need a captain, helmsman, and sailors. After reading it, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. Without these people, who would drive the boat back? Do you want them to walk back on their own? Moreover, what was the point of buying a ship? This was the most crucial point. The trade between Border Town and Willow Town was very stable. Even if they wanted to expand the ore trade after the end of the winter, they only needed to inform the other side to increase the number of ships. It was not worth it to buy his own ship, not to mention that the town's pier could only be used for docking. There was no dock to maintain it, and no sailors to take care of it. It would not be long before it was abandoned. It was probably His Highness's whimsical thoughts acting up again. As for the first condition, he could understand it. Currently, no one in the city hall was free. The dozen or so people that Berev had brought with him were in charge of supervising the trade, making statistical reports, and settling the accounts. On the other hand, he took care of administrative and legal work, which was obviously unreasonable. If His Royal Highness wants to separate these departments, he must expand the number of people in City Hall. It was a very normal reason, but the assistant minister did not want to let go so quickly. The satisfaction of having all the power in one person's hands was too great. He thought that even his teacher, the treasurer of the kingdom, was only in charge of Greycastle's purse, while he was the hand of the king. Ahem, well, it is only effective in Border Town, he added in his heart. Although His Royal Highness Roland had made such a promise, if he wanted to ascend to the throne, there was still a long way to go. Berev didn't know when, but he had unexpectedly put the fourth prince back into the ranks of the contenders for the throne. If it was before, he would never have thought that this bad character, ignorant and incompetent playboy could be crowned king. Since he came to Border Town, he had never stopped being surprised. So far, under the protection of the militia, Border Town was still standing in the western region. Moreover, it seemed that it would be able to hold on for a long time. This alone was worthy of praise. Not to mention the strange things he was playing with, even his grasp of people's hearts was completely different from the fourth prince in Greycastle, but more like the devil who understood everything. At this time, there was a knock on the door. Berev reluctantly stopped what he was doing and shouted, "Come in." The one who pushed the door open was one of his proud disciples, penholder Yarrow. "Teacher, another mouse has been caught." "Oh. What did you get from him?" "He said that he was sent by the second prince, and that he was found wrapped cement powder, some coins and a letter." Yarrow stepped forward and handed Berev an envelope wrapped in cowhide. "We're still interrogating him for other information." "Teacher, how to deal with him?" "As before, after the interrogation, all the information will be organized into a book. Then, he will be convicted and hanged," Berev said lightly. "Yes," Yarrow bowed and said, "then this disciple will leave." The door was closed again, but Berev didn't immediately continue his work. Instead, he returned to the table, cut open the envelope with a letter opener, and took out the letter. The fourth one, he thought. As early as before the arrival of the months of the demons, Roland Wimbledon had summoned him to discuss this issue. His Royal Highness believed that when the cement, the new snow powder, and the witches were exposed one by one, the brother and sister's spies would certainly not be able to hold back and would come out of hiding. This would be the best time to sweep away the mice. Berev agreed with the first half of the prince's sentence, but did not agree with the second half. In his opinion, there were more than 2,000 people in Border Town, so it was impossible to keep an eye on all of them. They didn't have the manpower, and they also didn't have the time to guard against these sneaky people. But His Royal Highness didn't care and said, "How could there be no one? Every citizen of Border Town is our eyes." At that time, Berev felt that the other side was completely whimsical. Let these ignorant and stupid civilians monitor the possible appearance of the mice? This was simply impossible. But the fact was, he was wrong. After the beginning of the winter, when the first census was conducted, Roland specifically explained to all the natives who had stayed here for more than 5 years, although Longsong Stronghold's plot to burn the food had failed, they still hadn't given up, and had sent their enemies to lurk around everyone. Most of them disguised themselves as relatives of the townspeople or merchants who were too late to evacuate, looking for opportunities to harm everyone. If anyone saw any suspicious person, they were to immediately report it to the city hall. Once it was verified, they would receive a reward of 25 silver royals. As a result, this trick turned out to be surprisingly effective. Although there were some false positives at first, it didn't take long for the first mouse to be caught. At that time, Berev still remembered that Roland had proudly said something that sounded very awkward. What was it? He thought about it. That's right. Let the enemy fall into the sea of people's war. What a strange word formation and syntax. The assistant minister shook his head and opened the letter in his hand. In the letter, the guy who was called the groundhog repeatedly emphasized that various phenomena showed that the fourth prince, Roland Wimbledon, had been replaced by the devil. Berev could even read his fear between the lines. Thinking of His Royal Highness's use of people's hearts, the assistant minister couldn't help but have a sense of approval. He took a deep breath and moved the letter to the candle flame. Soon the paper was engulfed by the flame and turned into flying ash. Chapter 72. Timothy Wimbledon sat on the throne with a ruby scepter in his hand, overlooking the ministers in the hall. This is the feeling I want, he thought, instead of squatting in Valencia and entangling with those merchants for small interests. He tapped his scepter on the ground, and the pure gold scepter made a crisp sound as it hit the smooth marble floor. Seeing that everyone's eyes were focused on him, he nodded and said, "Let's begin. Your Majesty, I have something important to report." The first to speak was Sir Weimer, nicknamed Steelheart Knight, who was responsible for the defense of King's City. "Speak. Can we temporarily stop the witch hunt?" "Your Majesty, the recent witch hunt has become more and more serious. Yesterday, I heard that some commoner women were arrested and humiliated in the dungeon, and one of them died in prison. Later, it was proved that they were not witches. Now the entire outer city is in a state of panic, and if this continues, I'm afraid there will be a large number of refugees." Timothy frowned. He was the one who asked for the witch hunt to be carried out. The truth of Wimbledon III's death had not been found out, but he never thought that his father would commit suicide, especially the strange smile before his death, which made his hair stand on end. His father wore the highest quality God's stone of retaliation, and the church also confirmed that the stone had not been replaced or lost its effectiveness, but this did not mean that the witches were not involved. When it came to being strange, no one was better at it than those witches. He shifted his gaze to Langley, the executor of the search operation, and also his henchman. The latter immediately stood up and said, "Your Majesty, it was just an accident, and I have severely punished the relevant personnel." He counted with his fingers and said, "The warden, the head of the prison, and the guards have all been sentenced to 10 lashes and 25 silver royals. 1 person died, 3 people were cruelly tortured, and the scoundrels just whipped them a few times and fined them." Sir Weimer said coldly, "Moreover, who gave you the right to judge? Was it Prime Minister Wick or Minister of Justice Palau?" "Your Majesty. Desperate times call for desperate measures," Langley said, kneeling on one knee. Ignoring some insignificant setbacks, the search was a great success. "We have captured at least 15 witches lurking in King's City and are currently being interrogated. Soon, we will know whether they and your father, whether they are planning any conspiracy." Timothy glared at him. This idiot, he had almost revealed his intentions. Although most of the ministers standing in the hall could guess the real purpose of his action, the statement to the outside world must be that Prince Gerald killed the king. This was not allowed to be overturned. 15 witches. The Steelheart Knight sneered in a contemptuous tone, "Very good, it turns out that King's City has become the witches' stronghold. A few years ago, the church had only managed to capture 6 members of the Witch Cooperation Association in the eastern forest of the kingdom. It seems like your henchmen are stronger than the judgment army of the church. You. Enough. Langley is an idiot. Langley's men are also a group of idiots, Timothy thought angrily. If not for the fact that there was no one available at the beginning of his ascension to the throne, he wouldn't have promoted such a fool. Even if he wanted to take credit, he shouldn't have made up numbers like this. I'm afraid that most of these 15 witches are the same as those unlucky commoner women. He didn't want the church to get involved in this matter, but at the moment there was no other way. Go to the church and ask Priest Fairy to confirm the identity of these 15 people. Stop the torture. After that, every person you catch must be verified by the priest. If I hear that your people can't control the people below, I will throw you into the moat of King's City to feed the fish. Yes, Your Majesty. Do it immediately. After telling Langley to get out of the hall, Timothy turned to the Minister of Finance. If any of them were wrongly accused, together with the previous 3, give 2 golden dragon as compensation. For the one who died in prison, give it to his family. He paused, give an extra 1. As you wish. The Minister of Finance nodded. Your Majesty is merciful. Sir Weimer also saluted. Let's move on to the next topic. Timothy spat out a foul breath. Seeing that none of the ministers were saying anything, he said, since no one has a new topic, then I will say it. He looked at the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Umbrella, Sir Brint. The recall order has been issued for more than a month, but so far no one has returned to King's City. Tell me, what is the situation now? Sir Brint came from the Furlan family and had been in this position for 30 years. His hair was grey, his face was old, and he already had 1 foot in the coffin. He cleared his throat. Reporting to Your Majesty, there is still no news from your 3rd sister, Garcia Wimbledon. Your 4th brother, Roland Wimbledon, has written back to me. In the letter, he said that after the months of demons is over and his people are safe, he will consider returning to King's City. But what? On the envelope, he called you Your Highness, not Your Majesty or the King. Timothy couldn't help but sneer. You're still as ignorant as before, my incorrigible brother. He thought, if you plan to come back, you should properly worship me as king, and I can also give you a good place to live as a pampered prince. If you don't come back, you should prepare for your deathbed struggle as soon as possible. Look at what you've done, wavering between chess pieces. You want to come back, but you're not willing to give in. What's the point of making a quick speech? Let him be, Timothy waved his hand. What about my 5th sister? Your Majesty, she disappeared. What? Disappeared? What do you mean? She first agreed to the messenger I sent, but a week later, Her Highness disappeared from the summer palace, along with her butler and 2 maids. I've arranged people to look for her, but so far there has been no news of her whereabouts. What's the result? One by one, they're all so unwilling to believe me. Timothy felt as if his heart was blocked. He originally had great expectations for his sister, hoping that she would be able to assist him. After all, Tilly had been exceptionally smart since she was a child, and her performance was even more dazzling than his. The only thing she lost to him was that she was a girl. Timothy was originally very confident in her, and from his father's arrangements, he also didn't intend to let Tilly get involved in this storm. The territory given to her was Silver City, which was not far from King's City. Trade was ordinary, and there was no soil for raising soldiers. Unexpectedly, my 5th sister actually ran away. Is this the choice a smart person would make? Since she ran away, let the former lord continue to be responsible for Silver City. The search must continue. I can't let a member of the royal family wander among the people. He gritted his teeth and suppressed his annoyance. So, now only my 3rd sister refuses to obey, right? Yes, Your Majesty. Since she's so stubborn, I have to take some tough measures. Timothy looked at the Prime Minister, Marquis Wyke. Issuing a war order required the approval of the king and the Prime Minister. He was his biggest supporter, so it shouldn't be a big problem. I intend to let Duke Joey, the guardian of the Southern Territory, send troops to force Garcia to give up the port of Clearwater, and escort her back to King's City. Marquis Wyke replied, "This matter cannot be delayed, Your Majesty, please issue a war order as soon as possible, and the foreign minister will be responsible for delivering it." Timothy nodded with satisfaction, and was about to call the clerk to draft the document, when suddenly there was a rapid sound of hooves outside the hall. Then, after a hubbub, a knight wearing a blue striped cloak opened the door and strode into the hall. Chapter 73. West of Border Town, Redwater River. The snow made it difficult for the carriage to move, so it took them half a day to drag the first field artillery out of the town. What is it this time? Carter was getting used to the prince's constant inventing of new things. An enlarged flintlock? Almost. Roland commanded his men to remove the hook, and then personally adjusted the angle of the cannon, so that the cannon body was flat, and the pole was placed in the snow. The principle of the cannon and the gun was exactly the same, so it was very appropriate to say that it was an enlarged version of the gun. This cannon fired a 12-pound solid iron ball, the shell and gunpowder were loaded from the front, and the fuse was ignited. Roland referred to the mature designs in history, and instructed the carpenters to build a set of wooden cannon mounts. In order to improve its durability, the parts that had more friction with the ground, and the parts that were subjected to greater force during firing were wrapped with iron. In order to make the cannon mounts and wheels, Roland spent almost the same amount of time drilling the cannon's bore. 3 carpenters were busy for a week before they finished, especially the diameter of the wheels, which had a diameter of half a person. The carpenters first planed out 4 equal pieces of square wood, soaked them, and then baked them with fire until they were bent. The ends were cut into grooves, and the outer edge of the wheel hub was covered with iron and hammered. It took 4 days to complete the entire process. Therefore, in Roland's eyes, this fully hand-built, limited edition 12-pound field artillery exuded a dazzling light. When he dragged it out for the test, the accompanying lineup was very large: Chief Knight Carter and Militia Commander Iron Axe, all of the personal guards and knight apprentices went into battle, and 20 people from the militia were responsible for clearing the field and guarding it. In addition, he also brought Nightingale and Lightning for the first time. Thanks to Nana, the militia's prejudice against the witches was reduced to a minimum, and Nana herself became the only person in the team whose reputation was second only to the prince. Let's do it according to the process. First, clean the cannon's bore. Although Roland was very clear about the structure of the cannon, the specific operation was a blank. He racked his brain to recall all kinds of cannon firing scenes from medieval movies, trying to sort out a set of procedures. As for the actual effect, only God knew. Lightning excitedly pulled out a mop-like cleaning rod from the bottom of the gun carriage and inserted it into the muzzle. Unlike other witches' contracts, Lightning offered to work for Roland as long as she could personally operate all kinds of novel inventions. Moreover, she didn't need to pay for it. Faced with this kind of money-saving condition, Roland naturally agreed. Anyway, when it came to the confidential project, he could just research it secretly. There were still many ideas and inventions waiting to be realized in his mind. Just a few of them would be enough to keep her busy for a while. After fiddling with it for a while, the mop did not bring out any junk, but according to the procedure, she still had to clean it a second time. He switched to another mop and whipped it a few more times to clean the cannon chamber. "Do you understand?" Roland asked the knights and militias who were watching from the side. This test was also a drill. Now that the production of guns had greatly increased, the militia was bound to evolve into an official infantry, and the wooden guns would also be replaced by guns and cannons. This required a lot of shooting training to be able to skillfully operate these 2 types of firearms on the battlefield. Seeing everyone nod, he let Lightning carry out the next operation. The little girl took out a bag of gunpowder wrapped in a paper roll, stuffed it into the cannon's bore, and used an iron rod to pierce it. Then she put in the shell and stabbed it again. She took out a drill pipe and inserted it into the fuse hole at the back of the barrel, pierced the gunpowder bag, and then inserted the fuse. In this way, the firing preparation was complete. In order to prevent accidents, everyone retreated 15 steps. Lightning put the torch near the fuse, only to see sparks at the end, and in the blink of an eye, it drilled into the barrel. Then there was a loud rumbling sound. The high-speed jet of air from the muzzle brought up the snow, raising a layer of snow fog on the ground. The theoretical effective range of a 12-pound cannon could reach more than a kilometer. Even without rifling, the trajectory of the front shell was still a straight line. The armor target placed about 100 meters away made a dang sound as it was hit by the 12-pound iron ball, and the whole thing flew up. The iron ball's momentum did not decrease, and after falling on the snow, it continued to bounce, stirring up a column of snowflakes. When the smoke dissipated, Carter and Iron Axe ran to the target. They saw that the front of the armor was completely caved in, the front deck was stuck to the rear deck, and a palm-sized hole was located in the center of the armor. Obviously, after the shell pierced through the target, it flew forward about 100 meters. Even when it fell on the ground and rolled, it still contained an amazing power. What a terrible penetrating power! Carter sighed. He could already imagine the tragic scene when the enemy gathered together and was penetrated by several shells. 3 gods above, Iron Axe began to believe that Roland was the messenger of Mother Earth. Apart from God's messenger, who else could exert the power of the flame to such a degree? He had repeatedly studied the gunpowder particles, and as long as they were crushed into powder and ignited, they would become a common flammable substance. Fire was Mother Earth's surging anger, and it was also her most powerful weapon. When he thought of the never-ending orange fire that erupted from the cave in the southernmost land, he had the urge to worship the prince. Roland was not surprised by this result. The 12-pound field cannon could be said to be a classic, especially the Napoleon cannon that shone brilliantly in the American Civil War, which fully proved the truth that a large caliber was beautiful. Next, he used different charges to test the strength of the barrel. Although he knew that it might cause the cannon to be damaged, it was still a necessary test. Until the third charge was added, when the cannon was fired, the muzzle was raised, and the position of the mount was shifted, but the barrel still did not show any obvious deformation. It seemed that the steel barrel performed very well in terms of strength. In the end, Roland set the standard charge at 1.2 times the experimental charge, and all that was left was to select the gunners and practice repeatedly. "Your Highness, this weapon is indeed powerful, but it is too heavy. As long as it encounters a mud pit, it will not be able to move." Carter immediately saw the shortcomings of the new weapon. Moreover, after each round of firing, the barrel needs to be cleaned and the charge reloaded. In addition, the gunpowder and shells are much heavier than the flintlock. I'm afraid that just one cannon will require 5 or 6 people to operate. Indeed, but everything is worth it, as long as we are equipped with 2 or 3 cannons. The Duke, no, I mean the demonic beasts, the giant tortoise kind, will not be able to break through the city wall. Roland coughed twice, thinking that it was a close call. As for the shortcoming of the 12-pound cannon, he intended to solve it through shipping. If a steam engine wanted to be transformed into a steamship, even the most primitive paddle steamer, it would still require a complex and huge mechanical system. Chapter 74. What, you can't afford it? Roland sat in his office. The document requesting the expansion of administrative staff and the purchase of sailboats was placed on his desk. Berev cleared his throat. "Your Highness, it is true. The price of a 2-masted sailboat is between 80 and 120 golden dragon, but this is only the cost of building the boat. Including the people on board, the total price is estimated to be more than 200 golden dragon. Didn't I say that I don't need a sailor or a helmsman? I don't need the captain, I just want the boat." Roland knocked on the table and asked. With Vendi there, he didn't need so many people to operate the sailboat. Most of the river boats had straight sails, so it was like raising and lowering a flag. The oarsmen and sailors were redundant, the helmsman just needed to pull someone up to try. Anyway, with the wind vector, why would the boat not move forward? "Your Highness, there is no such deal, at least not in Willow Town." Berev carefully explained. "You may not know much about this industry, but generally speaking, the owner of the boat is the captain. It may be a merchant, or it may be a noble. The former, after recruiting their own men, will travel back and forth between the major town docks, trading or transporting goods. If it was the latter, they would usually hire an acting captain to follow the ship for them. Employees are not paid monthly, but are paid once every 1 to 3 years. Most of the time, the boat and the people are tied together. If you intend to buy the boat from the captain instead of his hired men, then it is equivalent to a loss of employment pay. 80 golden dragon, even for a great noble, is not a number that can be easily given up. At the beginning of the month, including the raw gemstone transaction with Willow Town, City Hall now has a balance of 315 golden dragon. If you spend more than half of it to buy a boat, you will not be able to pay the militia next month. The assistant minister finished in one breath, raised his glass and drank a mouthful of ale. You said most of the time, yes, he nodded. There are 2 situations where there will be an empty boat. One is when the merchant is in urgent need of cash and sells his property. At this time, he will dismiss all the crew and sell the boat as soon as possible. The second is to replace the boat, which is understandable. But I have to say, both situations are very rare. Wait. Roland frowned. You said you want to buy new ships. Where did these ships come from? Port of Clearwater, Seawanshire, North Cape. Only port cities have docks, and only they can build ships. Roland was silent for a moment. It was too far to buy a ship in the port city, and if he didn't hire a crew, who would drive the ship back for him? If that's the case, I'll think about it. After the assistant minister left, the prince fell into deep thought. In his strategic plan, shipping was an irreplaceable part of it. Without a fast and convenient ship, he would not be able to complete the encirclement with the cannons. The army of the Duke of Stronghold was generally made up of farmers, knight, and mercenaries, so their marching speed was not very fast. It was just that they were slower. Just as Carter had said, if they relied purely on land, a muddy pit would make it difficult for the cannons to advance. In this era, land transportation was not the same as asphalt roads, or even stone roads. It was just that there were a lot of people, so they were forced to make a path. It was fine when it was sunny, but when it rained, it would be muddy. In the end, do I still have to rely on myself to build it? Roland spread out a piece of paper and wrote down the specifications he needed. First of all, it was a ship that could carry 1 or 2 cannons, plus about 30 people. The ship could be propelled by sail. Second, the ship needed to be stable and reliable, not easy to overturn, and had a shallow draft. Third, it had to be easy to operate. After a short period of training, the militia could quickly get used to it. Combining these points, there was only one answer left, a flat-bottomed barge. Before Roland came to this world, this kind of extremely shallow draft, with a very low center of gravity, could be seen everywhere, almost all the major rivers. In the past, those that were piled up with sand or stones, and the side of the ship was almost level with the water, were flat-bottomed barges. As long as there was a tugboat, it could pull several barges like a train. After determining the type of ship, the next key point was to choose the material to build it with. Roland wrote down 3 options on the paper: wood, iron, and cement. Using wood to build a ship was the earliest navigation technology tree of mankind. From wooden rafts to sailing battleships, from rivers to oceans, wooden ships could be said to be everlasting. Unfortunately, Roland did not know how to use logs to put together a flat-bottomed boat, nor did he have any craftsmen. If he relied on a few carpenters, it was likely to be a large raft, or the kind that could fall apart at any time. For an iron ship, the structure was similar to building a house. The main and secondary beams crisscrossed to form the keel, and then covered with iron sheets. If there was Anna to do the welding, the overall rigidity was guaranteed. But this approach would exhaust the small iron reserves. Unless it was a last resort, it was obviously a more suitable choice to use the iron to produce steam engines and gun barrels. Then the cement ship became the last option. The city wall had been built, and there were still raw materials left. Anna only needed to calcine it once or twice to get enough cement powder. The construction process was also much easier than for an iron ship. He only needed to use a wooden template to piece together the shape, arrange the iron bars to act as steel bars, and then fill it with cement. Even in his hometown in the countryside, he could make several cement boats to fish. Compared to the iron ship, which needed to be regularly rusted and painted, it didn't even need to be maintained. It could be said that the cost was low, and it was strong and durable. Even if he had not learned how to build an ocean-going ship, building a low-tech inland river cement barge should not be a big problem, right? With the mentality of trying, Roland picked up a quill pen and quickly drew a sketch of the barge. A shed with a wall was built on the bank of the Redwater River. In order to facilitate the launching, Roland built the ship as close to the river bank as possible. The shed could shelter them from the wind and snow, and at the same time there were 2 charcoal fires in the room to prevent the temperature from being too low, which would affect the hardening effect of the cement. The carpenters had already pieced together the basic outline of the hull. The bow was curved to reduce forward resistance, and the stern was square to increase the load area. The width of the ship was about 24 feet, 8 meters, with a length-to-width ratio of 3:1, and a double mast in the middle. The mast was inserted into the bottom of the ship, and was connected to the iron beam that ran through the middle of the ship. There was also a wooden stake at the stern, which was reserved for the rudder. Other places were covered with crisscrossing iron bars. It didn't matter if there was no binding wire, all the iron bars were welded by Anna herself, forming an iron net all over the bottom of the ship. When the template and steel bar were ready, Roland ordered the workers to start pouring and tamping. The mixed cement was poured into the template in the basin, and the middle was flat, and the surrounding was about 1.5 meters high, which acted as the side wall of the cabin. At first glance, it looked like a unique large bathtub. Chapter 75. Kara could feel the person under her breathing quicken. "Let's change people," she said in a low voice. "Yezi, you carry me." Walking through the impassable mountain range was very exhausting, especially in the winter when it was snowing heavily. 42 witches couldn't walk far at the end of the day, so they had to find a suitable campsite and recharge their badges in order to withstand the sudden drop in temperature at night. "Yes, mentor." A witch squatted down in front of her, and Kara summoned a snake to wrap around the witch's arm, pulling her over. At the same time, she noticed that the witch couldn't help but tremble slightly. "Damn Nightingale," Kara thought bitterly. "If she hadn't repeatedly refused my kindness, I wouldn't have been so heartless to hurt my sister." At the critical moment of finding the holy mountain, Kara couldn't allow any accidents to happen. And the result? After the traitor escaped, she didn't hesitate and directly tried to stab me to death. Look, this is the result of being kind. Kara's mind was boiling with anger. That stab had injured her spine. Although Leaf's improved herbs had quickly healed the wound, her lower body had been paralyzed, and she had completely lost feeling in her feet. Once they reached the holy mountain, they would gather more witches, and one day they would catch her and tear her to pieces. "Mentor, there are demonic beasts approaching." Scarlet, who was in charge of the investigation, reported. Her eyes could see through obstacles and cover, and any trap in front of her would have no place to hide. At the same time, she also had a very high ability to see moving objects. She had personally shot down the crossbow of the army of judges during the confrontation with the church. "Put me down, Leaf, you go and help them." The witch carrying her nodded, squatted down, and put Kara on a stone. Her hands, which were supporting her body, sank into the snow, and a cold feeling came through her palms. Kara thought with some displeasure, "Can't you first wipe off the snow and then put me down?" But she didn't say it out loud. Leaf was an irreplaceable figure in the team. If the Witch Cooperation Association relied on Vendy's good temper to bring the witches together, then Leaf was the one who gave everyone the courage to follow her. Without her ability, more than half of the witches would have died while being hunted by the church. Thinking of Vendy, Kara couldn't help but feel pain in her heart. She never expected that the person who had founded the Witch Cooperation Association with her would betray her because of Nightingale. Even when Vendy blew her away, she had never thought of killing her. The venom secreted by the snake of magic, pain, took effect slowly. The pain was unbearable, but it would not kill the person immediately. After being bitten by nothingness, the venom would be quickly removed. She just wanted to make Vendi suffer a little. However, if left alone, the poison would invade the head and there would be no cure. Nightingale had made the wrong decision to take her away. Without the antidote from nothingness, Vendi would not be able to survive a day. Could it be that she, who was once a nun of the church, was destined to not be able to walk to the end with her sisters? As for the other traitor, Lightning, Kara didn't care too much about her. She had only joined the Witch Cooperation Association for a short time. She seemed to have the ability to fly. She always put forward different opinions when searching for clues about the Holy Mountain, and even openly questioned the Holy Book. If it wasn't against the philosophy of the Witch Cooperation Association, she really wanted to petrify this talkative little girl and throw her into the snow. The demonic beasts emerged from behind the hillside. 2 wolf-like creatures. The witches of the Witch Cooperation Association had been able to deal with this situation easily. The sisters who didn't have the ability to fight moved closer to the rear. Leaf took the lead in activating her magic, causing the weeds under the feet of the demonic beasts to grow wildly. In the blink of an eye, the green leaves broke through the snow and wrapped around the feet of the enemies. The other witch, Windchaser, drained the air around the demonic beasts. The 2 monsters soon fell into a state of suffocation, foaming at the mouth, twitching and falling to the ground. This is the power of witches, Kara thought. When facing 2 demonic wolves with only a sword, a mortal would lose their life if they were not careful. Only witches with magical powers are the favored children of God. If it weren't for the god's stone of retaliation, it should be called the Hell's Stone, she spat on the ground. If it weren't for this abominable stone, how could the church dare to ride on their heads? Mentor, please come up. Leaf came to Kara's side and bowed. Choose another one, Kara sighed. You are also tired. The group continued on their way. At noon, the snow gradually weakened. Stone, who was in charge of the camp layout, found a leeward place. Everyone decided to take a short rest here and eat to replenish their strength. Stone quickly transformed the land. The snow was overturned by the soil and gravel, and the ground seemed to come alive. It intertwined and wriggled, and soon it became flat and hard. Everyone went about their duties, set up the pots on their backs, and started a fire to cook porridge. Snow water was poured into a cup and boiled, mixed with some herbs improved by Leaf, and immediately emitted a strong fragrance. Everyone, give your badge to Snow, shouted a little girl. She had a rare red hair, like a dancing flame. Her ability was also related to fire. She could inject heat into an object, making it hot for a long time. The badge of the Witch Cooperation Association, the Holy Mountain Coin, was made by her. Although it seemed insignificant, it was a great help to the Witch Cooperation Association. Especially in the impassable mountain range, without a warm object, it was easy to lose heat in the cold wind and snow and lose consciousness. After eating the wheat porridge, everyone packed up and prepared to continue on their journey. According to Kara's speculation, the so-called Hell's Gate was actually the key to the Holy Mountain. But the church deliberately painted it as an evil place, hoping to prevent witches from reaching the Holy Mountain. According to the ancient book, they had to pass through 3 stone gates, the last one was in the barbarian land. It was usually hidden deep in the ground, and only when the bloody moon appeared in the sky would the stone gate rise to the surface. From the camp, they had been walking in the impassable mountain range for about half a month, and soon they would leave the mountain range and enter the barbarian land. In the past few days, the demonic beasts had appeared more and more frequently. Quick, quick, look, what is that? Someone suddenly shouted in horror. Kara raised her head, and her jaw dropped in surprise. A city appeared on the horizon. Snowflakes continued to fall from the gray sky, the clouds were very low, and the outline of the city was looming in the clouds. She had never seen these buildings before, they were like spires standing side by side. If the dense black dots on top of the spires were windows, then these spires were at least 100 feet high. This was definitely not something a human could do. Even the church's proud Hermes Cathedral, known as the Tower of Heaven, was only 15 feet high. Since it was not a human's creation, then there was only one answer: it was a city built by God. Kara was unable to restrain her excitement, and a voice kept shouting in her heart. Chapter 76. Sisters, that's the holy mountain. We found it. Kara screamed, expressing her joy. Many witches were stunned in place, shocked by the spectacle in front of them, but some also reacted and hugged their companions around them, crying. Scarlet Eye frowned. Is that really the holy mountain? What's wrong? Is there something wrong? Leaf came forward and asked in a low voice. She also had the same question in her heart. The city in the sky didn't look like the one described in the ancient book, which was golden and magnificent. Although the steeple was spectacular, it was gray and black. Even in the daytime it was dim. Not to mention the red mist that filled the sky above the city, which was as thick as blood. There's something squeezed in those holes. Scarlet Eye's voice was a bit dry. I can't see it clearly, but those things don't look like God. Leaf felt goosebumps all over her body. In the Witch Cooperation Association, Scarlet Eye was the one who could see the farthest. Her words made Leaf feel a little uneasy. Unfortunately, Lightning had already left with Nightingale, otherwise she could fly closer to take a look. Sisters. The holy mountain is in front of us. The mentor raised her hands and shouted, let's work harder, we will soon find eternity. After saying that, she immediately urged the stone girl to carry her forward. Leaf wanted to step forward to dissuade her, but she took a step back. She remembered the fate of Vendi half a month ago. At this time, she was afraid that any dissuasion would be meaningless. If they didn't see it for themselves, the mentor would not give up. The group of people began to speed up. After leaving the foot of the mountain, the snow unexpectedly decreased, and the surrounding temperature also rose. This is the legendary Forbidden Area, an area that humans can't set foot in, Leaf thought, but now they are leaving their footprints on this uninhabited land. If Lightning was here, she would be very happy, right? Looking back, the towering mountains behind them rose and fell, like an insurmountable barrier. Leaf couldn't help but wonder if it was because of the impassable mountain range that the demonic beasts couldn't directly attack the hinterland of the mainland, so they had to detour to the extreme north. No matter what, if I can really find the holy mountain, I won't have to wander around anymore, and I'll be satisfied. She sighed softly. To tell the truth, when Nightingale had told her about what she had seen and heard in Border Town, she had been moved. When Vendi asked who wanted to leave with Nightingale, she couldn't help but want to take a step forward and announce her name. But in the end, she still couldn't cross the threshold in her heart and was defeated by the shadow of her past. Leaf shook her head and told herself not to think about these things that had already passed. She kept up with the pace of the team and rushed through the yellow and white fields. But something strange happened. No matter how fast they sped up, the city seemed to be moving at the same speed as them. After walking for an hour, the holy mountain was still suspended in the clouds, neither getting bigger nor smaller, as if they hadn't moved at all. Mentor, please take a rest, the sisters are tired, Stone said. During this period, there had been several waves of people who had been carrying the mentor, but she was the one who had persisted the longest. No, how can we stop now? Kara refused her suggestion without hesitation. This is a test from God, sisters. Without a strong will, we will never reach the holy mountain. We can't stop, we must go on until the gate of the holy mountain appears in front of us. Seeing that persuasion was useless, the group had to continue moving forward. But the situation didn't change. On the way, the witches encountered 2 waves of demonic beasts, and the second wave had 2 deformed hybrid beasts. Leaf's sweet binding didn't last long, and one of the witches was caught off guard and her neck was cut open by a sharp claw, blood spilling all over the ground. After dealing with these monsters with great difficulty, the witches found that the sky was gradually getting dark, and it was obviously dusk. The city was still in front of them, but its outline had become more blurred. as if it was about to disappear. According to their past experience, they had to find a suitable place to build a camp, but this place was completely different from the impassable mountain range. As far as they could see, it was almost flat, and with the possibility of demonic beasts appearing at any time, it was impossible for them to spend the night in such a place. Mentor, let's retreat to the foot of the mountain. Let Scarlet lead the way, and let Red Pepper illuminate the way, maybe we can rush back before midnight. No. Kara shouted, it took us the whole afternoon to get here, and we almost didn't stop on the road. Now that most of our physical strength has been consumed, it's impossible to maintain our original speed. Sisters, hold on for a while, until we find the holy mountain, we can really rest in peace. What about Shirley? Someone asked, pointing to the dead witch on the ground. We don't have time to bury her, the mentor shook her head, leave her here, the earth will receive her. Leaf sadly closed her eyes, another sister had left, if only her strength was a little stronger, she wouldn't have to die in this desolate place, without even leaving a tombstone. Just as everyone was hesitating whether to go forward or retreat, Stone suddenly exclaimed, look at the sky, the city has disappeared. Leaf opened her eyes and looked up, only to see that the sky had turned gray, and the clouds were hidden in the night sky. The city had disappeared without a trace, as if it had never existed. Everyone stood in place, and for a moment there was a terrible silence. The city that could never be approached, the illusion that floated in the air, the disappearance of the sun at sunset. Leaf's mind suddenly remembered the adventure stories that Lightning had told her, the bizarre illusions that she had seen on the sea. She shivered and whispered, we have been deceived. Soon, she shouted, we have been deceived, that is not the holy mountain. What we saw was a mirage. Mirage? Kara suddenly turned her head, her expression was a little frightening, what is that? Lightning said that this phenomenon is often encountered during long voyages, but it is much rarer on land. What we saw was just an illusion, the real city may be far away from us, or even not in front of us. That at least means that it really exists. And it hasn't disappeared. This. Leaf was stunned, I don't know. At this moment, Scarlet suddenly issued a warning, be careful. Something is coming. She stared at the left side of the group, her face looked very ugly. Demonic beasts again. Windchaser made a fighting posture, how many? No. Scarlet took 2 steps back, I don't know what it is. While speaking, a black shadow came from afar, and with lightning speed, it directly shot towards Scarlet. Although she saw the shadow coming towards her, she couldn't dodge it, unlike a crossbow, it was too fast. Almost in the blink of an eye, the shadow pierced through Scarlet's chest and sent her flying, directly nailing her to the tree trunk behind her. Chapter 77. Leaf felt as if all the blood in her body had frozen. On the left side of the night, 2 shadows slowly appeared. Their bodies were huge and strange, unlike the common demonic beasts. When they got closer, Leaf discovered that they were actually 2 humanoid creatures riding on the back of a hybrid. Their bodies were tall, twice the size of a normal person. They didn't wear any armor and wore clothes made of unknown materials. No, it was barely enough to call them clothes. They looked more like the swollen skin of an animal. They were tightly wrapped from head to toe, and many places were swollen. The most striking thing about them was the heads they wore, which were obviously transformed from the heads of demonic beasts. They looked ferocious and terrible. The eyes of their heads were dug out and sewn together with a piece of reddish-brown crystal. A leather tube full of patches extended from the lower edge of their heads and extended to the huge carapace pouch on their backs. One of them had several spears stuck on his mount, while the other wore strangely shaped iron gloves. Judging from their appearance, they only had 3 fingers. In Leaf's mind, there was only one word, devil. Fight the enemy. Kara was the first to react. Her ear-piercing scream drew everyone's attention back to the enemy. Stone pressed her hand on the ground, turning the large area of snow in front of her into a soft swamp. This could be regarded as a very correct response. The devil's mount was a hybrid with a wolf's head and wings. It was fast and could also fly short distances. But these two obviously couldn't. Their wings had been cut off, and the exposed bones were tied with hemp ropes and held in the devil's hands. If they couldn't fly through this swamp, they would have to go around it, which would give the other witches time to react. However, the enemy didn't act according to the witches' idea. They drove their mounts forward and threw themselves into the swamp. Then, with the momentum, they jumped from the demonic beast's back, crossed a distance of several feet, and landed behind Stone. And that was where the non-combat witches gathered. Quickly disperse. Before Leaf's voice had died away, the devil wearing a three-fingered iron glove had already started a massacre in the crowd. His agility was completely incompatible with his size. A witch who was close to him didn't even have time to react before her head was smashed by his fist. Then, two more sisters had their necks broken by the sturdy iron hands. Only then did the others come to their senses and flee in panic. Only Senor stood where she was. Even though her ability wasn't suitable for combat, she didn't turn around to run away. Instead, she took out the crossbow from her back and aimed it at the enemy. The Iron Hand demon dodged to the side and kicked her away. The force was so great that it was like a muffled thunder. The little girl flew far away before rolling on the ground, blood clots gushing out of her mouth. The demon with the spear turned around and walked towards Stone, who was already scared out of her wits. Just as the spear was about to pierce the witch's chest, a ball of flame exploded in front of him. Red Pepper rolled past the enemy's crotch, grabbed Stone Maiden's hand, and turned to run. The other party wanted to chase after him, but he was blocked by a black wall of chi. Leaf injected all of her magic into the earth. All kinds of plants grew crazily, twisting into a thorny vine, crawling towards the Iron Hand demon. Kara's summoned Pain snake also tightly bit the demon's arm. Just as he waved his hand to get rid of those annoying snakes, the vine that quietly approached him from behind suddenly wrapped around his feet and pulled him back. The demon's huge body crashed to the ground. "Run, sisters, run!" Leaf shouted. Fear made her voice tremble. "Run, get away from these terrible monsters. They are the source of evil recorded in the ancient books, the devils that came from the gates of hell." The snake's torture venom seemed to have no effect on them. The fallen Iron Hand demon arched his body as if he wanted to grab the vine that was pulling him around. Seeing that his companion was in trouble, the demon with the spear quickly turned his attention to Leaf, who was controlling the vine. He raised the spear and took a throwing posture. His arm quickly expanded. The originally swollen skin was stretched to a thin layer, through which one could even see the dark red blood vessels and bones. "Leaf, be careful." Stone once again turned the ground into a quagmire, this time directly under the opponent's feet. The demon fiercely sank down, instantly changing the direction of the spear and inserting it into the ground in front of Leaf. The spear, which was nearly as high as a person, was almost completely inserted into the ground, scaring Leaf into a cold sweat. After throwing the spear, the swollen arm quickly shrunk and became like dry wood. The spear demon couldn't throw continuously. She immediately realized that it was a good time to escape. The other witches also noticed this. Stone, Red Pepper and Windchaser ran past Iron Hand Demon, who was still struggling on the ground, and ran towards Kara, wanting to take their mentor and escape together. Only Leaf saw that the demon, who was being pulled by the vine, stretched out his hands towards the three witches. What does he want to do? Wait. No, she didn't even have the time to open her mouth to warn them. A dazzling blue light burst out from the demon's iron hand, like a bolt of lightning piercing through the sky, twisting and hitting the three witches. The blue light jumped between the three witches, making a crackling sound. White smoke rose from their bodies, they twitched and fell down, their robes also burning. This attack seemed to have consumed a lot of the enemy's strength. He breathed heavily and no longer moved. At this time, Leaf's magic power also reached its limit. The vine disintegrated and soon turned into withered weeds. It's all over, she thought. The mentor's desperate cry seemed to become very far away. Her whole body's strength faded away like a tide. She powerlessly fell to the ground. After a short rest, Iron Hand slowly climbed up from the snow and walked in front of Kara, who had a frightened look on her face. At this time, no one could stop him. The demon reached out and grabbed the mentor's throat. The latter desperately tried to pry open the demon's fingers, but it was useless in the face of the great disparity in strength. While struggling, the magic snakes rushed out and bit the demon's arm and neck, but the demon remained unmoved and continued to tighten his iron hand. At this time, an accident happened. One of the magic snakes under the demon's indiscriminate attack bit off the leather tube under the demon's helmet. A thick red mist sprayed out from the cut, quickly enveloping Kara and the demon. The former screamed horribly, her skin quickly festered under the red mist, revealing tendons and white bones. The latter loosened his iron hand and hurriedly tried to block the tube, but as the mist quickly dissipated, his body began to tremble uncontrollably, and before long, he fell to the ground, never to move again. Half of the demon's body was buried in the swamp. Seeing this, Leaf shouted loudly. She had never heard such a sound. It was like a sharp hissing mixed with a low growl, piercing her ears. But the demon's roar didn't make Leaf flee. On the contrary, she saw her only chance to win. Biting her lip, she struggled to stand up, picked up the crossbow that Snow had dropped, reloaded the string, and walked in front of the spear-wielding demon. Obviously, the demon understood what she wanted to do, waving his arms desperately, but in the swamp, the more he struggled, the faster he sank. He tried to cover the tube, but the part that extended to the carapace bag on his back was exposed. For my lost sisters, Leaf thought, aiming at the tube and pulled the trigger. The crossbow accurately penetrated the leather tube, and the red mist sprayed out from the hole. When the mist stopped, the demon's head drooped down. She killed the demon. Chapter 78. Wendy opened her eyes, and the unfamiliar rooftop came into view. There were wooden beams with cobwebs, gray brick ceilings, and a ring chandelier that had never been lit before. The scene went from vague to clear, until every detail was presented. It wasn't a cold rock roof or a narrow tent, she thought, right? I've been away from the Witch Cooperation Association for more than half a month. I don't know if the mentor has led the sisters to the Holy Mountain. She took a deep breath, although it wasn't as fresh and cold as in the cave, but the dull and warm atmosphere in the room made her feel very comfortable. Her body was wrapped in soft velvet, and there were several layers of cotton blankets under her body, so when she lay down, she would slightly sink. Even if she stretched her body completely, her toes would not be exposed. The feeling of wanting to stay in bed made her feel a little guilty. Obviously, she had only been here for half a month, but she felt a long-lost sense of peace. In the castle, no matter how late she got up, no one would disturb her. For example, now, Vendi turned her head and looked out of the window. The gray sky was even somewhat dazzling. It was probably past 10 o'clock. In the past few years of wandering, there were few times when she could sleep peacefully. The slightest noise would wake her up from her dreams, and she had to prepare for today's food before dawn. When she went out, she had to worry about being discovered by the church, and no one could guarantee that they would survive the next demonic bite. Even if she was hiding in the impassable mountain range, she should have been busy with chores, or helping to dry the food and herbs, drying the sisters' clothes that were wet from the snow, or cleaning the camp. It wasn't that Vendi was unwilling to do these things. Seeing everyone smile, she would feel very happy. But she found that, for such a lazy life, she couldn't resist it. Instead, she was somewhat immersed in it. No, I can't be lazy like this anymore. She patted her cheeks and gathered her strength to get up from the bed. After all, in the convent, the head nun often warned that lazy people would not be blessed by God. Later, I'll go to the back garden to practice controlling the wind, and while I'm at it, I'll blow away the snow. Thinking of His Royal Highness' requirements for practice, Vendi couldn't help but want to laugh. Those were some strange requirements. For example, after watching the demonstration, he wanted to be able to blow the wind more than 10 steps above his head. However, no witch had ever been able to spread her magic so far. When he was told that he couldn't do it, he didn't get angry. Instead, he came up with a strange idea: let himself stand on the stool and make a strong wind blow from both sides at the same time. Vendi gave it a try and found that it was a feasible method. The results of the test made His Royal Highness very satisfied. In addition to asking him to practice according to this method, he also asked him if he had acrophobia. Just as Nightingale had said, His Highness Roland Wimbledon was an unpredictable person, but he was also a prince who cared deeply for the witches. Thinking of this, Vendi sighed softly. A prince who doesn't hate witches really exists. Master, you're wrong. Putting on the new clothes, Vendi felt that her chest was slightly bloated. She was used to this kind of thing. Just when she was about to find a needle and thread to fix it, there was a knock on the door. Come in. It was Nightingale who pushed open the door and entered. Vendi was slightly startled, then smiled and said, Your Highness hasn't woken up yet? You actually have the time to come here. What are you talking about? I don't have the time to follow him every day. Nightingale raised the basket in her hand. I brought you breakfast. Breakfast was usually sent to the room by the maid. Except for Nightingale, who often came to chat with her after His Royal Highness went to bed, it was very difficult to see her at other times. Vendi smiled in her heart. She just woke up and ran over to bring food. She must have sneaked in to see me several times. Tell me, what's the matter? She took the basket, took out a piece of bread with cheese, and put it in her mouth. Well. Nightingale went to the bed and sat down. Nana will spend that day today. Vendi was silent. Although it was the first magic bite, it wouldn't be as violent and long-lasting as the day of adulthood, but it still couldn't be said to be absolutely safe. The younger one was, the lower their tolerance to pain. She put the basket on the low bedside table, walked in front of Nightingale, and patted the other's shoulder. Didn't His Royal Highness say that as long as you keep releasing your magic every day, you can minimize the pain? But that's just speculation. At least it sounds very reasonable, Vendi comforted her. Didn't Anna come through like this? Even on the most difficult day of adulthood, she didn't suffer any harm. This is what you saw with your own eyes. She paused, then asked, What about Nana? She is now in the hospital. Nightingale couldn't help but smile. I heard that her father, Baron Pine, bought a large group of wild rabbits from the hunters, and now they are all sent to the hospital. He said that she will continue to practice until tomorrow. It's good to have such a father, Vendi sighed. I don't remember anything about my childhood. It's very strange, it's like my memory is blank. I don't have a father, I don't have a mother. From the time I found out, I stayed in the monastery. It seems that I'm a little luckier than you. Well, a lot of luck. Vendi sat close to her. Are you nervous? Nightingale was silent for a moment, then gently nodded. Vendi, of course, knew what the other was nervous about. Today was not only a crucial day for Nana, but also a crucial turning point to change the fate of the witches. If Nana could safely survive this backlash, it meant that the witches could completely get rid of the shadow of the devil's minions, and Border Town would become a veritable, holy mountain. One day, all the witches would gather here, living a life no different from ordinary people, no longer having to wander around to avoid the church's hunt. No matter how much we worry, it's useless. We might as well steal a day of laziness and accompany Nana. Steal, laziness? Nightingale stared at Vendi with wide eyes. Yes, who told you to tell me the news so early? It made me nervous, Vendi simply said. Since you're not in the mood to practice, it's better to visit Nana. Isn't it written in the contract? It's called paid leave. After dinner, Nana's room was full of people: Anna, Lightning, Nightingale, Vendi, Mr. Pine, and Roland. Seeing this scene, the little girl's face was full of confusion. Will I die? Of course not. Everyone shook their heads. It's only the first time, the backlash won't be very strong. Vendi held Nana's right hand and said, Concentrate, you'll be able to persist. If it hurts, pinch Dad's hand. Mr. Pine shook his daughter's left hand and said, You've become very strong in the hospital. Dad is proud of you. The little girl nodded, her line of sight crossed the crowd, and finally looked at Anna. Anna stepped forward and kissed her forehead. Liv, okay? Chapter 79. All the curtains were pulled down, and the fireplace was burning, keeping the room at a comfortable temperature. Unlike Anna, who had passed her day of adulthood, Nana was awake. In order to ensure that she could quickly gather her spirit before the pain came, everyone accompanied her to tell stories or play some simple games, so that she wouldn't fall asleep. Roland also performed a few coin magic tricks, which made everyone stunned, especially Nana. Her eyes were glued to Roland's hands. If it was a normal day, she would probably have already shouted that she wanted to learn. The magic in this era was still stuck at the stage of acrobatics. Roland had seen in the palace, such as playing flutes and dancing snakes, spitting flames, and breaking stone slabs on the chest. Compared to the small-scale magic in the future, which was more focused on camouflage and finger techniques, it was obviously inferior. Finally, Lightning told about her sailing experience. She and her father, Thunder, traveled between islands and fjords, crossed whirlpools and reefs, and hunted deep-water giant sharks and octopuses. Although they knew that most of it was fabricated, everyone listened with great interest. Even Roland was deeply immersed in it. In the picture he imagined, those sailing ships became ironclad battleships, galloping on the vast and boundless ocean, arriving at the New World. In fact, he didn't understand the historical process of this world. There were clear records of years ending more than 450 years ago. Recalling the knowledge the prince had learned from the palace tutor, he didn't mention the reason. Perhaps this guy didn't pay attention to the lessons, he thought. Border Town also didn't have any archives or library facilities. After taking over Longsong Stronghold, he would find a few knowledgeable people to ask. When Lightning finished her adventure story, Roland couldn't help but yawn. He looked at Nightingale, but the latter shook her head, indicating that there was still no change in the magic. It was so inconvenient to not have an accurate timekeeping tool, it was impossible to judge how long they had waited. Roland poured himself a cup of warm water and sat down to continue waiting. But gradually, everyone became aware that something was wrong. This period of time was too long. Nana yawned again and was about to fall asleep due to exhaustion. Nightingale also became anxious. She touched the little girl's forehead while staring at the movement of magic in her body. Roland picked up the cup and found that the water had been drained. He went to the fireplace and refilled the kettle. As he passed by the window, he could not help but lift the curtains to see if the snow had changed. As the heavy curtain was lifted, a small gap, a ray of light shone in. He was pleasantly surprised to find that a hint of white had appeared on the dark horizon. "Look!" Roland pulled open the curtains. Everyone was startled by his shout and turned around. Looking at the faint light in the distance, everyone realized that a new day had arrived. Nana safely passed the day of the magic bite. Roland stretched his body and returned to his bedroom, only to find that there were two more people in the room. Nightingale and Vendi. There was no trace of sleepiness on their faces, only excitement. "Are you sure that Nana's date was today?" "No, it was last night," Roland asked. "Yes, but the change at that time was very subtle. I didn't think it had reached the critical moment of the bite," Nightingale said with certainty. "Your Highness, what you said is correct. As long as we continue to release magic power, the total amount will continue to increase, but the body will bear less pain. If we can maintain a certain amount of training every day, all witches will have a great chance to live past the day of adulthood. In the entire Greycastle Kingdom, only your territory can allow witches to freely display their abilities. In a sense, this is the witches' holy mountain," Vendi continued. "I want to beg you to let as many witches as possible know this news, so that the sisters can come to the holy place as soon as possible. I think they will be willing to serve you." "I originally planned to do so," Roland nodded. "Wait until the end of the months of the demons, the people will have a certain degree of understanding and contact with witches. At that time, I will arrange for people to spread the news, in the form of rumors. You should know that I can't openly recruit witches, that would cause a great uproar in the country." He paused for a moment. "Unless the church perishes, or I ascend to the throne. Then I am willing to help you ascend to the throne." Vendi seemed to be waiting for these words. She did not hesitate to kneel on one knee and swear her allegiance. It could be seen that her movements were not skilled, it seemed that she was just learning and applying it. But Roland did not care about these details, he still treated Nightingale and accepted the other's allegiance. After getting up, Vendi smiled at Nightingale. "How did I do?" The latter curled her lips, "Barely." Roland helplessly shook his head. "In that case, go to bed early, you haven't slept all night." "Your Royal Highness, I have another request." Vendi, who had just stood up, knelt down again. "Say it." Roland stopped smiling and asked seriously. The other side's attitude clearly showed that it was not easy to answer the question. "I want to go back to the camp again." "Vendi." Nightingale looked at the other side in surprise, the latter's eyes were full of determination. "I don't know whether they found the holy mountain, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I hope to go to the impassable mountain range after the end of the months of the demons. If Kara did not find the holy mountain, they should have returned to the mountain. This situation is the most dangerous." Roland frowned. "Your respected mentor attacked you without any consideration for friendship." "If she really wanted to kill me, I would have died," Vendi said. "The snake she summoned was pain, not death sentence. I may not be able to bring back many people, I may not even be able to bring back a single person, but I can at least tell this news to my sisters. As long as they release their magic every day, they won't have to suffer that terrible pain." At this point, her voice became very soft. "Your Royal Highness, as long as you treat the witches well as always, my life belongs to you, and naturally I won't easily give it up. I will protect myself. Please promise me." Roland was silent. Out of safety considerations, he should refuse Vendi. But he also knew the meaning of this request for the other side. Once there was an opportunity to save more witches, she would be willing to take the risk. If he refused, she might obey his orders, but the sisters she would lose would leave an eternal scar in her heart. "I promise you," Roland finally nodded, "but you must wait until 2 months after the end of the months of the demons, and you must go together with lightning. I will give you guns to protect yourself, and a god's stone of retaliation. Lightning will act as support from a distance, and you will wear a god's stone of retaliation to negotiate with them. This way, Kara or the other witches will not be able to use their ability to hurt you. Your Royal Highness, please let me accompany her," Nightingale said. Chapter 80. After the cement boat was placed in the nursery for a week, it was finally time to put it into the water to dry. The workers who had been summoned were stunned. When the prince ordered the bathtub to be pushed into the water, everyone doubted whether they had heard wrong. However, Roland's order was indeed so. He temporarily dismantled the shed, and then dug a slope at the bottom of the cement boat, leading straight to the river. This part had to be done very carefully, because the tensile and seismic resistance of cement products was extremely poor. A few cracks were a small matter, but if it hit the ground, it would be tantamount to nothing. Rolling logs were put on, and ropes were tied to control the speed of sliding. When everything was ready, the workers wrapped the wrist-thick hemp rope around the newly laid stake and pulled it into a straight line. With a command, they slowly loosened the rope, and the bottom of the boat slid on the rolling logs, making a harsh friction sound. Fortunately, everything went smoothly. Roland saw the cement boat gradually fall into the river. The whole boat was about half a meter deep, and the wall of the boat was still about a meter above the water. The workers were surprised to see that this thing, which was heavier than a stone, did not sink into the river, but floated on the water like leaf. "Quickly, wrap the rope around the stake a few more times, and then tie it tightly," Roland commanded. The hemp rope tied to the hull could not be untied, otherwise the cement boat would float south with the river. Although Nightingale did not appear, her incredulous tone had revealed her shock. "Why can it float?" In short, its average density is lower than that of water, so it can float on the water," Roland replied after thinking for a moment. "As for whether it is iron or cement, it has little to do with it. In fact, when you see the sailboat, you should understand that such a big boat is much heavier than a stone." The voice did not sound again, and he guessed that Nightingale had fallen into deep thought. Even if it was Anna, she might not be able to react immediately. Roland smiled and continued to instruct the workers to carry out the next step of the work. It would take a long time to dry the clothes. When it started snowing heavily, the work had to stop. Only when the snow was light could they rush to work for a while. The main content of the assembly was to lay the deck. Pieces of planks with bevels were installed on the ship. There were many short wooden stakes in the gap between the deck and the bottom of the ship as support. Although it was a waste of space, considering the main purpose of the cement ship, they did not care so much. Then came the embalming treatment. The carpenters knew exactly what to do. First, they brushed a layer of pungent oil on the deck. After the oil had solidified, they repeatedly applied several layers of red paint. When everything on the deck was completed, the installation of the superstructure began. As for the so-called upper part, it was just a wooden shed between two masts, used to store cannons and ammunition. When it rained, the crew would also have a place to shelter from the rain. There was also a platform at the top of the wooden shed that could accommodate one person. It was obviously prepared for Vendi. As long as she stood on the roof, the range of her ability could cover both the top and bottom of the sail. The rudder at the stern was made of pig iron, which was slightly troublesome to install. It was necessary to put the tiller through a hole in the water so that it was exposed to the deck. Then the iron ring was put on the deck and the buckle was welded. The buckle was a right-angled triangle iron plate, the long side was welded to the tiller, and the short side could be freely rotated in the reserved slot of the iron ring. The welding work was naturally done by Anna. She was also shocked and puzzled by the stone bathtub that could float on the water, so she asked the same question as Nightingale. Roland repeated the answer and saw Anna squatting on the side and thinking. Well, universal education has a long way to go. On the other side, Vanner was hesitating about whether to join the artillery team or the gun team. Everything started from the order 3 days ago. His Royal Highness decided to transfer the outstanding members of the 1st and 2nd Militia team to form a new team. Vanner was very happy to hear his name was included. But when Iron Axe asked him if he wanted to join the artillery team or the gun team, he was confused. He knew that the gun could deal with the demonic beasts on the city wall, and its penetrating power was much stronger than the crossbow. At present, only Iron Axe, the chief knight, and several hunters could use such a fierce weapon. Vanner should have joined the gun team without hesitation, but he just asked, "What is a cannon?" When he learned that it was a gun that was magnified 10 times, and its power was 100 times stronger, he fell into a dilemma. Obviously, the more powerful the weapon, the more it proved that His Royal Highness valued him. Joining the artillery team seemed to be a better choice than the flintlock team, but carrying a perfectly straight flintlock on his back, walking through the streets of the town, attracting everyone's attention, this was the scene he had always dreamed of. Although the cannon was powerful, after magnifying 10 times, he certainly couldn't carry it, right? Until the last day of the deadline, he gritted his teeth and chose the artillery team. The last straw that broke the camel's back was the monthly salary of 5 silver royals higher than that of the gun team. Then the rigorous training began. A cannon needed 5 people to operate. Jop, Cat's Claw, Nelson, and Rodney were assigned to the same group with Vanner. Because Vanner had served as the vice-captain of the Lancer team, he was appointed as the gunner. Compared to the gun, it was more than 10 times more troublesome to operate. For more than a month, he had secretly observed the process of Iron Axe operating the gun, and he thought he was already familiar with it. But just changing the firing state from the moving state to the firing state required a set of complicated operations. Stopping the horse, pulling out the pin, pulling up the buckle, moving the gun carriage, pushing it to the firing point, and putting down the support, all these procedures required 5 people to cooperate. For example, when pulling up the buckle, the other people had to immediately push the gun, so that the buckle and the tractor separated, and the 4 wheels became 2 wheels, and then the support could be put down. During the conversion period, they had to cooperate skillfully, otherwise it would be difficult to remove the heavy gun carriage from the tractor. After getting into position, it was time to load the ammunition and prepare to fire. This part was very similar to the gun, but cleaning the barrel required 2 brushes to take turns to stab it. The gunpowder was also packed, and could be directly put into the barrel. The ignition method was ignited by the gunpowder wire. It seemed that it would be difficult to display its power when it rained, Vanner thought. Fortunately, most of the time the gunner only needed to instruct the others on what to do, so he didn't have to spend too much energy. Chapter 81. Every day, this kind of training would last 4 to 6 hours. After that, he would return to the city wall and continue to do his old job. A fellow in the same dormitory had signed up for the firearm team. Now, he was holding a brand new firearm and standing behind him, showing it off. If it were not for the discipline that forbade fighting, Vanner would have sewn his mouth up. But he could also see that something was wrong. How many days had the villagers who joined the firearm team been training? They had already started to hone their shooting skills in the battle against the demonic beasts. But what about the artillery team? They hadn't even fired a single shell. Moreover, it was impossible to transport such a heavy cannon to the city wall. Looking at the top of the wall, 2 people standing side by side almost filled the passage. Usually, everyone was used to running on the slope on the inside of the wall. Even if it was a little steep, it was better than hindering their teammates from thrusting. As for the cannon, its 2 wheels were wider than the top of the wall. Plus, it had to shoot downward, so it didn't seem very practical. Could it be that this thing wasn't used to deal with the demonic beasts? The following practice confirmed Vanner's guess. The 4 artillery teams were brought to the river by iron axe. He found that, at some point, there was a huge ship in the Redwater River. No. He was not sure whether it was a ship. Its shell looked no different from the stone used to build the city wall. It was wide and short, and except for 2 bare masts, it didn't look like a ship at all. For this reason, Vanner's team began to argue. This is clearly a pontoon bridge. Jop was the first to come up with this conclusion. He had once followed a mining sailboat to Longsong stronghold, so he often boasted that he was very knowledgeable. The several feet wide deck is obviously for the sake of stability. I've traveled far and wide. If it was a ship, how could it move without wind? In the past, there was a flood in this river and the wooden bridge in Longsong stronghold was washed away. The people in the city replaced it with a pontoon bridge. They nailed a pile of wide planks to the boat, and then pulled up iron ropes to form a row, so that it could walk steadily. The farthest place you've been to is Longsong stronghold. You've traveled far and wide, Rodney sneered. If it's a pontoon bridge, do you need 2 masts? Are you afraid that it will be blown away by the wind? And look at the end, isn't it the steering wheel? Pontoon bridges can't use this. The 2 brothers were always on the same side. Besides, the wooden frame in the middle looks like it's going to be a shed, but it's not finished yet. It's a ship, no doubt about it. Vanner was not interested in whether it was a ship or not. He only cared about the following training. The answer was soon revealed. Iron Axe asked them to bring the horses that were pulling the cannon onto the little town. Yes, that was the name of the ship, and it was named by His Highness himself. After listening to Iron Axe's introduction, Jop's face immediately stiffened, while the 2 brothers were immensely proud of themselves. They then attached the cannon wheel to the barricade. There were 2 groups of such bars, 4 in each group. They were positioned at the center of the deck, one in front and one behind. Obviously, 2 cannons could be loaded at once. Well, Vanner thought, now he could be sure that they were not dealing with demonic beasts. The Redwater River flowed from the north to the south, and there was no such wide river in the concealing forest. The first time Vanner set foot on the deck, he immediately felt its outstanding stability. The river flowed along with the hull of the ship, but the stone ship remained motionless, as if it was standing on the ground. Only when the horses were caught up would they feel the sway. He also noticed that every time a group of artillerymen completed a round of boarding and disembarking exercises, Iron Axe would record the time. Considering the barricade on the deck, it seemed that only 2 of the 4 groups could be used. Vanner secretly told this news to the members of his group, and they immediately gathered their strength and used all of their strength in every step. If they were not selected and were kicked back to the spear team, it would be a small matter to lose face, but losing the salary would be a big deal. On the 7th day, Vanner finally ushered in the long-awaited live-fire training. On this day, His Highness also came to the scene to watch the artillerymen practice. Everyone in the 4 groups held their chests high and walked with great energy. Since everyone was quite familiar with the loading process, Vanner's group was the first to fire the first shot. This was also the first time he had witnessed the power of the artillery. With a deafening roar, the iron ball, which was twice the size of a fist, fell on the snow 1 mile away, stirring up a large amount of snow and mud, and then bouncing forward for a long distance. Vanner's naked eyes could not even catch the trajectory of the iron ball. This made Vanner excited, but also a little scared. How did His Highness make such a terrible weapon? If he had to face the artillery attack, even if he had a full body armor, it would be useless. After each group had fired a round, His Highness would order someone to insert a flag at the first landing point of the cannonball, and at the same time cut off a hemp rope from the flag to the muzzle. After 4 rounds, when it was Vanner's group's turn again, he heard the order to change the angle of the muzzle. The 2 ends of the cannon barrel were connected to the mount, and there was a dial engraved on it. The dial was labeled 0, 5, 10, 25, and 30. Although he didn't quite understand what it meant, he just had to follow the instructions. Iron Axe shouted, "Shoot the angle 5." Jop, who had the greatest strength, immediately placed the brush shaft under the chamber of the cannon barrel and pried up the cannon from the tail end. Vanner twisted the screw on the carriage until the first white line was inserted into the hole. Only then did Jop loosen the brush. After the end of the barrel fell back, it was slightly lower than the original position. The muzzle was lifted up, and the indicator scale fell on the number 5. Then there were 4 rounds of shooting, inserting the flag, cutting the rope, and adjusting the angle. Vanner gradually understood what His Highness was doing. He was collecting the distance of each iron ball, and the higher the angle of the muzzle, the farther the iron ball would fall to the ground. Vanner had a deep understanding of this when he used the bow. When the arrow was thrown upward, it could shoot farther, but if it was shot horizontally, it would quickly fall to the ground. He did not expect that the artillery was also like this, but because of its high speed, it could fly much farther. He could not help but wonder, if the iron ball's speed reached a certain level, would it never fall to the ground? Beside the Redwater River, Little Town's trial was also in full swing. Chapter 82. As the only professional with experience at sea, Lightning was duty-bound to serve as the navigator. In fact, she was also interested in this strange barge made of strange materials. Although it looked very rough, it had all the necessary parts for a ship. As for whether it could move, she was not sure. After all, she was mostly a bystander at sea, and her father always refused her request to take the helm or raise the sail. According to the tradition of a new ship, Lightning smashed a can of ale on the bow and then ordered to raise the sail. Carter, as the commander, was naturally unwilling to let the little girl take the position, so after she finished shouting, the knight would always follow up with the same order. The sails of Little Town were sewn out of animal skins, most of which were cowhide and sheepskin, mixed with some local products of border town, such as wolf skin and bear skin. Therefore, the colors were of different shades, brown, white, and gray, like rags that were full of patches. The sails were trapezoidal, separated by 4 wooden beams, and the cables passed through the iron rings at the top of the mast and hung on the deck. As long as the cable was pulled, the whole sail could be raised. In order to make the operation as simple as possible, Little Town's front and rear sails were single sails, parallel to each other and perpendicular to the centerline. If it was a common 2-masted sailboat, it would lead to very little wind, which was equivalent to losing its function. But with Vendy's ability to control the wind, this design would make the power evenly distributed on both sides of the centerline, making it easier for the helmsman to control the direction. Seeing that the sails were raised, Lightning directed the workers on land to untie the hemp ropes. The weather was not bad at this time, with occasional snowflakes falling from the sky. Pushed by the breeze and the current, the ship slowly left the shore. The little girl landed next to Brian and shouted, "Full right rudder." Carter also shouted, "Full right rudder." What does full right rudder mean?" Brian scratched his head. "How many laps to the right?" "No, turn left to the end," Lightning said with her hand on her forehead. "Forget it, I'll do it." She forgot that this was the first time for these people to operate a sailboat, and they didn't even understand the basic meaning of the instructions. If it was a standard two-masted sailboat, she was afraid that the sails would not even be unfurled. Even with less than 10 people, the stone ship was able to smoothly leave the shore. It could only be said that the design of Little Town was indeed unique. She held the handle of the steering wheel that was even taller than her. Her feet left the ground and she turned to one side. The huge horizontal steering wheel was very heavy for ordinary women. In the absence of mechanical assistance, it was equivalent to overcoming the resistance of the water and pulling the entire iron rudder under the bottom of the ship. But all of this was not a problem for Lightning, who could fly. She noticed that there was a piece under the tiller to prevent the ship from turning around. She couldn't help but be curious. She had heard that the ship was designed by His Royal Highness, so how could he know such details? Even sailors who spent most of their time at sea would not necessarily know the structure of each part of a ship. "Sister Vendi, let the wind rise." Standing on the roof, Vendi didn't know whether to laugh or cry. So this was the reason why His Royal Highness asked her if she had a fear of heights. "Using myself to propel the boat?" Thinking of the work she usually did, such as drying meat, drying clothes, and so on, she suddenly had a subtle feeling of contrast. She opened her hands and entered the state she practiced on a daily basis. She let the wind blow evenly from her feet and head, trying to make the two sides of the sails as equal as possible. To be honest, Vendi didn't think that this seemingly simple request would be so difficult to implement. Although she had awakened as a witch 15 years ago, she had never tried to deeply understand and control her own power. Whether it was summoning a rapid airflow to wrap around a stone to attack the enemy, or summoning a gust of wind to sweep the enemy away, it was all a one-time release of a large amount of magic. And when dealing with chores in the camp, the wind was also sometimes strong and sometimes weak, as long as it could achieve its goal. Now, thinking of Anna's serious appearance when she practiced, Vendi suddenly felt a little ashamed. The first thing you have to do is to repeatedly practice your ability until you fully master it, just like Anna. It turned out that it wasn't a cliché. "Then I'll start from now." She took a deep breath and focused all her attention on sensing the wind. Although the wind wasn't completely balanced, the sails were still inflated, and the continuous thrust made the mast creak, and the bow began to sway to the right. "It actually moved," Carter exclaimed. "His Highness made a stone into a boat, but also made it float on the water," Mr. Pine said while stroking his beard's stubble. "Is there anything he can't do?" The little town was getting farther and farther away from the river bank, gradually sailing in the middle of the river. Vendi could only create wind out of thin air, but she couldn't make the original north wind disappear. Under the action of the two winds, the direction of the hull was not moving in a straight line, so she had to rely on the rudder to adjust. Lightning couldn't explain this point clearly, so she could only let Brian experience it himself. In order to let him master this feeling as soon as possible, the little girl first commanded him to change the rudder several times, feeling the relationship between the angle of rotation of the rudder and the amplitude of the bow swing, and then making further subtle adjustments. After sailing on the Redwater River for more than half an hour, Vendi was the first one to be unable to hold on. It wasn't because her magic was exhausted, but because her body had reached its limit. Even if she wrapped her body like a dumpling, she still couldn't completely resist the attack of the cold wind. A thin layer of snowflakes had accumulated on her cotton hat, and her hands and feet were frozen to the point of almost losing their feeling. She stood on the roof teetering. If it wasn't for Lightning discovering something strange while cruising in the air, she might have persisted until she fainted. Lightning quickly flew to Vendy's side, grabbed her body, and at the same time shouted for Brian to come ashore. The latter turned the rudder to the right, and the bow slowly turned to the left. Lightning also flew down with Vendy. Although they could only feel the wind blowing on the deck, at least they could temporarily avoid the cold, so as to avoid losing body temperature too quickly. Moreover, docking was a task that required delicate control, so Lightning didn't dare to let a newcomer who had just learned how to steer operate, even if she also didn't know how to do it. After tossing and turning, Little Town finally reached the shore, and the moment it collided with the river bank, everyone's heart jumped. The collision produced a dull sound, but fortunately it didn't seem to be a big deal. The group quickly folded the sails, and set up a gangplank to go ashore. Fortunately, during the trial, they didn't choose to go in a straight line, but instead turned around in the wide river to practice, so Little Town didn't go too far from the starting point. Chapter 83. For most of the Northerners, winter was a time of no harvest, especially in the towns and cities near the Hermes Plateau. The months of the demons brought not only continuous rain and snow, but also cold, hunger and death. But, fake leg, White was different. Every winter, the church's emissary would come to his door and ask him to drive a few times to the border of the kingdom of Wolfshart, pick up the suffering orphans in the carriage and send them to the old holy city. This was a good deal, he could earn almost 20 silver royals in one trip, and it was also a good deed. This year's months of the demons was coming to an end, so this carriage should be the last one. My lord, why don't you go to the carriage and stay there? It's snowing outside for a while. Unlike us, you don't have to eat the wind and drink the snow every day, so don't get cold. This is nothing, the emissary took out a bottle of wine and took a sip. The new holy city is much colder than here. On the plateau, leather clothes and armor can't keep out the cold. They are like pervasive devils, drilling into every part of your body. Without the cold-expelling pill, that place is really not a place for ordinary people. You're right, White nodded. He had never been to the new holy city, and he didn't want to go. There was only ice and demonic beasts, why would he want to go there? But as an experienced coachman, he could always find a new topic, and this emissary was much easier to talk to than the previous one. Your gloves are made from the special wolf skin from the western region of Greycastle, right? Oh. You know this? Hey, my lord, I've been doing this for almost 30 years, White said proudly. First I drove for the Baron, then for the Countess, and even for the Wolfshart Princess. If I hadn't had an accident and broken my leg, maybe I would still be in the Count's mansion. They don't have anything else, but they have a lot of golden dragon, fur, and silver from Greycastle, jewelry from the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, handicrafts from the fjords, and so on. So that's how it is, the ambassador nodded. Is this the origin of your nickname? What kind of accident happened? Well, it was a refugee riot. Those scoundrels will do anything for some food. White spat. At that time, they surrounded the carriage. In order to protect the Countess, I had to urge the horse to run wildly. As a result, the horse was startled, and I fell off. The carriage also turned over. So you broke your leg? Asked the ambassador curiously. And the Countess? She's better than me. There were cushions and thick quilts in the carriage. I was just badly bruised, White said indignantly. She climbed out and ran away, leaving me on the road. I dragged my broken leg home and spent all my savings to buy myself a prosthetic leg. He knocked on the copper rod that was sticking out of his trousers. But the Earl's mansion chased me out on the pretext that I could no longer drive. Those damned nobles. It is a pity, the ambassador paused, but God has not abandoned you, you are now driving for the church. Heaven is merciful. Yes, my lord. Heaven is merciful. No, if heaven had been kind, he would not have let this happen to me, White thought. He did not save me when I needed him most. At this moment, the sound of a girl crying came from the carriage. Stop. White pulled the reins, gradually bringing the two horses to a stop. The ambassador jumped off and went around to the back of the carriage. Soon, there was the sound of a whip cracking inside the carriage. "Poor children," he sighed. "Bear with it, this is your savior. Without the Lord Emissary, you would not have survived this winter. You would have become a corpse on the street." After a while, the ambassador came back and climbed onto the shaft of the carriage. "Let's go. Sit tight. Go." White shook the reins, and the carriage started to move again. "Do they all come from all over the kingdom of Wolfheart?" "Almost. The churches in every town in the kingdom will take in some orphans. Especially in the winter, when there is a shortage of food and clothing, we will take in several times more people. It is impossible to rely on the monks of the church alone, so we will hire some reputable drivers to help us transport them." "You have performed very well, White. My predecessor praised you very much." "It is my honor to participate in such a good deed," White grinned. "My lord, will they all be sent to a monastery?" "Forgive me for talking too much, but although they are all orphans, their character is different. Some of them may be young, but they have done everything. Will such people pollute the Holy Land? God will judge. Even if they are guilty, they will have a chance to be redeemed." "Is that so? That is really a good thing." White raised his head and looked at the sky. "It's getting late, my lord. Should we spend the night in the next town? If the weather is good tomorrow, we should be able to reach the old holy city by noon." The ambassador sighed. "Let's find an inn with a courtyard. As long as the carriage can be parked, it will be fine. You go and prepare food for them." "Yes," White replied. This town was the only way to the old holy city from the kingdom of Wolfheart. It was not his first time here, so he was familiar with the road and soon found the inn he usually stayed in. After driving the carriage into the courtyard, he took the money from the emissary and went to buy food for the orphans. As usual, sweet potato porridge was the most suitable choice. It was cheap and tasted good. After watching them distribute the porridge, White limped back to the inn, asked for bread and butter, and sat in front of the bar to eat. As for the emissary, he must have a better place to go. If it was 10 years ago, before he broke his leg, he would definitely go to the tavern and order a glass of wine, then find someone to throw a few dice. His luck was always good at that time. But now, White touched the money bag in his arms. It was better to go back to his room and rest early. In the evening, he heard some noise in the courtyard. White got up and lifted the curtain. He saw the drunken emissary unlock the carriage door and get in. After a while, he dragged out 2 orphans. There were 2 people standing behind him, and they were dressed like nobles. White put down the curtain and returned to the warm bed. This was not the first time he saw this kind of thing. The previous ambassador often did this. Being alive is the greatest luck, he thought. Compared to temporary pain, it is better to endure. When you arrive at the holy city, you will be able to usher in a new life. At least in the monastery, you don't have to worry about starvation and cold. White yawned and fell into a deep sleep. At dawn, he took the emissary and continued to move forward. The journey was very smooth. They arrived at the old holy city an hour earlier than expected. There was already a carriage of the church waiting for them. It seemed that this group of poor people still had a long way to go, but it had nothing to do with him. "This is your reward." The emissary threw over a cloth bag. White took it and counted it twice in his palm. It was indeed 20 silver royals. He nodded and bowed. "I hope to see you again next year." The emissary did not answer, but waved his hand to signal him to leave. White noticed that in addition to him, there were several other carriages doing the same work. Perhaps they were sent from another kingdom? He thought, but there was one thing that was very strange. All the carriages seemed to be little girls. When the church adopted orphans, did they only adopt girls? Chapter 84. Bishop Mayne walked down the circular staircase, one step at a time, heading deeper into the ground. This was a naturally formed sinkhole, the depth of which was at least 4 towers of heaven, with a diameter of more than 20 feet, which was more than enough to fit a lord's castle. The inside of the well was not dark at first. There were skylights on the high dome, and the light penetrated through the windows into the ground, leaving zigzagging spots of light on the ice-cast stone wall. As he continued to descend, the spots of light gradually darkened, and soon blended with the stone wall. But the center of the pit reflected a faint blue light, and the deeper he went, the more obvious it became. Even without a torch, he would not fall into a situation where he could not see his own fingers. The staircase under his feet was like a small snake circling the pit, tightly attached to the rock wall. The staircase was cut out of granite, rectangular, 3 fingers thick, enough for 2 people to walk side by side. One end was embedded in the rock wall, and the other end was suspended in the air. In order to prevent accidental falls, there were wooden railings at the suspended end, and the railings were connected by ropes. He did not count how many stairs there were, but he knew that the laying of each slate was extremely difficult. The church's masons hung down by ropes, and in the hard rock, they cut a groove deep enough, and then put the slate into it. Every movement had to be careful, because the rope slipped or snapped, and more than 300 people fell into the pit. If the Hermes Cathedral built above was the symbol of the unyielding spirit of the church, then the Hermes mechanism hidden deep in the bottom of the well was the real core of the church. The stone wall beside the staircase was inlaid with God's stones of retaliation, and every 100 steps there was a judgment army standing guard. There was also a team of God's punishment army on standby to meet the intruders. And between the dome and the mezzanine of the floor of the cathedral, there were many sandbags and gravel buried. If the holy city's defense line failed, and everyone had to evacuate, the Pope would activate the trap, and let the gravel completely bury the place. Although it was not the first time that Maine went to the Hermes mechanism, the feeling of walking in the air still made him dizzy. Especially when he looked down, he always had the illusion that he was falling. When his feet landed on solid ground, he heaved a sigh of relief. At the bottom of the sinkhole was a huge disc-shaped white grindstone. Its surface was as smooth as a mirror. Standing on it, one could even see their own reflection. Through the ingenious design of the craftsman, the light coming in from the dome's skylight would be refracted many times in the pit wall and converge on the grindstone at the bottom of the pit. Even though there were no torches, the bottom of the sinkhole was not completely dark. Only when one was at the bottom of the pit would one realize that the sunlight was not colorless. When the grindstone was illuminated, it reflected a faint blue light. Looking up, the entire sinkhole was illuminated by this blue light, showing a cold luster. If one looked carefully, they would notice that there were countless dust particles flying in the brighter areas, just like the tiny creatures recorded in ancient books. Using the naturally formed holes in the mountain walls at the bottom of the cave, the church connected them and further expanded them to build the Hermes mechanism. It was also thanks to these holes that allowed the air to circulate freely in this place. It was completely different from the rotten and oppressive feeling of being deep underground. As soon as Maine entered the door of the mechanism, the defense suddenly became a lot tighter. The army of judges here were divided into groups of 5, guarding each checkpoint. They were the most loyal warriors of the church. Once they accepted this responsibility, all of them would spend the rest of their lives in the mechanism, never to return to the surface. In fact, only he and the Pope could enter and exit the mechanism. Even the 2 archbishops Heather and Tafun couldn't set foot in this place. But Maine also didn't know how many forks there were in the end. In addition to the main road in the south, there were many branching passages on both sides. Following them all the way, one would often find more branches. Some of them were used by the church, while others were simply sealed. He had heard that, when they were building the mechanism, several craftsmen mistakenly entered those unmarked forks. As a result, they lost their way inside, never to find their way back. The straight main road went all the way to the depths of the mountain. Every 30 feet, about 100 meters, or so, there was a checkpoint. Maine knew that the tasks of the traps in each checkpoint were different. The outermost section was the living area, where the warriors who guarded the bottom of the cave lived. The second section was the archives, used to store documents, fragmented books, and ancient books. The third section was the prison area, where some prisoners who couldn't see the light of day were kept, and the innocent. After crossing 3 checkpoints, Maine stopped in his tracks. If he continued to walk forward, he would reach the secret area of the mechanism, where all the research and inventions of the church came from. Without the permission of the Pope, he wouldn't be able to go there. In the 3 years since he became the Archbishop, he had only gone there once. Maine turned to the left and turned into a fork. The fork was very short, so it didn't take him long to reach the end. Seeing the bishop appear, the army of judges guarding the door immediately clenched their fists and punched their chests. "Your Excellency." Maine nodded, opened the door. Inside the door was a corridor. The walls were hung with burning turpentine torches, like countless flickering lights in the darkness, continuously extending along the end of the corridor. On both sides of the corridor, there were a number plate hanging in the middle of each door. The army of judges raised their torches and led the way. Maine paid attention to the changes of the numbers on the number plate as he walked. When he saw the mottled number plate with the number 35, he stopped, took out a key, inserted it into the keyhole, and gently twisted it. The sound of the lock being unlocked was particularly harsh in this quiet cave, and there was a faint echo from the end of the corridor. As if it was a signal, there were many cries coming from behind the door, some from men, some from women. Listening carefully, most of them were pleading, "Let me out, save me, please, kill me," and so on. Maine was unmoved. After ordering the warriors to guard the door, he walked into the room and closed the wooden door, isolating the chaotic and noisy voices outside. Through the iron railing, the bishop saw an old man sitting on the bed. Perhaps he wasn't old, but his hair was white and his forehead was full of wrinkles. He hadn't shaved for a long time, and his beard almost hung down to his neck. Because he hadn't seen the sun for a long time, his skin was frighteningly pale, and his hands and feet were as thin as bamboo. Chapter 85. The old man took a moment to respond. He slowly lifted the quilt, moved to the bedside, and looked directly at the Archbishop. "If you were locked up in this damn place, would you still be able to eat?" he said. His voice was muffled, as if his throat was blocked by something. "Half a year, I've been trapped here for half a year without any news. What happened to my son? What about my daughter?" Maine noticed that the walls were full of scratches, which seemed to have been made by nails. Did the other party use this method to count the days? He moved a stool and sat down facing the king. "Do you have to ask these unpleasant things?" The other party was silent for a long time. "I'm no longer useful. Are you here to send me on my way?" "Yes. I'm just a dying man. Why would I care about unpleasant things? Before I die, I just want to know their situation." By the time he finished his last sentence, Wimbledon's voice was already close to a low roar. In the end, he couldn't stand it anymore. Maine thought, no matter what, as a king, his spirit and demeanor were enough. After being replaced by the devout, on the way to Hermes, he tried many times to escape. Imprisoned at this time, he did not fall into madness, but instead tried to negotiate in exchange for freedom. There was no abuse, no hysterical roar, which was rare in the mechanical prison. If it wasn't for the fact that the plan could not be changed, he really didn't want to waste such a person on internal conspiracies. "Perhaps I came in person with the idea of informing him of the current situation," the Archbishop thought. "Otherwise, with just a command, the army of judges would end his life for me." "Your eldest son, Gerald Wimbledon, is dead," Maine slowly said. "He was sentenced to be beheaded by your second son, Timothy Wimbledon, on the charge of rebellion against the king. Your third daughter, Garcia Wimbledon, became independent in the Southern Territory, and called herself the Queen of Clearwater, so a war with Timothy was inevitable. As for your fourth son and fifth daughter, we didn't get much news. Probably, they are still alive." "What are you talking about? Rebellion? Independence? What did you do?" "Order to fight for the throne," he said, enunciating each word. "Assign your children to different places, and declare that whoever governs his territory the best will be the next king. Wimbledon closed his eyes in pain. After a long time, he whispered, "Why? You took advantage of the day of prayer to take me into a cubicle and strip me of my clothes, and the god's stone of retaliation. You used a witch to replace me with someone else. You could have slowly taken over this country and built churches in every town. Why did they issue such a thing as the royal decree for the selection of crown prince? I couldn't possibly." Cough, cough. Speaking of the agitated part, Wimbledon bent his body and coughed violently. "There's no way I'm going to issue an order that's going to cause kids to kill each other, right?" Maine finished for the king in his heart. "Perhaps you won't, but your children may not necessarily do as you wish. When they grow up, they will have their own ideas. For example, your third daughter, Garcia, as early as 5 years ago, she obtained the port of Clearwater. Even if there is no order to fight for the throne, or if you wait until you die of natural causes, will she just watch Gerald ascend the throne and remain indifferent? The most important thing is, we don't have time to plan slowly. You should have noticed that a witch's ability is not permanent. Damn it, what good will it do the church if they fight each other? The church will fall into a sea of fire, the believers will also lose their lives in the war, the kingdom will be in chaos." At this point, Wimbledon suddenly froze and looked up in disbelief. "Do you want to?" A more violent cough interrupted the king's words. After recovering with great difficulty, his voice became as thin as a gossamer, as if the coughing had consumed all of his energy. "You want to destroy the royal family." "Exactly, but it would be more accurate to say that it is the royal power." Maine couldn't help but praise in his heart, what a sharp judgment. After staying in this dark dungeon for almost half a year, the fact that he didn't lose his mind could already be counted as having a firm will. Over the years, the number of people who can still think, can be counted on one hand. The royal power will hinder the development of the church, no matter how weak it is, it will always grow slowly like a seedling. Only by uprooting it, can the church truly obtain this kingdom. Wimbledon's expression suddenly became a lot older. Perhaps it was only his appearance before, but now even his spirit had declined, and the light in his eyes had become dim. Greycastle is the largest kingdom in the mainland, with a large number of soldiers, and a direct war against the church is disadvantageous. We have been planning for this for a long time. Your kingdom is bound to lose a lot of soldiers and mercenaries in the civil war. As long as it continues for 2 or 3 years, our army of judges will be able to easily take over the whole territory of Greycastle. You don't have to be too sad, you are not the only king of a kingdom, the other 3 kingdoms are also the same. In the future, the mainland will no longer be divided into 4 kingdoms, the Kingdom of Dawn, the Kingdom of Wolfheart, the Kingdom of Everwinter, and Greycastle will all disappear. In this vast land, there will only be one regime, and that is the church. Wimbledon was silent. This man who had seized the throne from his brother by force now seemed to have lost his vitality. Even Maine felt a trace of pity, but he didn't have the slightest regret in his heart. The church also paid a lot for this. A large number of outstanding believers were willing to be pawns, and threw themselves into this layout without a care for their own safety. The man who played the role of Wimbledon III was a devout chief judge in the army of judges. He had a firm belief and absolute loyalty to the church, and was originally going to accept the transformation ceremony of the God's punishment army. However, in order to fulfill his mission, he was replaced by a witch with the appearance of the king, and died without any honor in the king's bedroom in Greycastle. He could have carved his name on the monument in the Church of Hermes, but now, the church could only bury his name forever. Maine thought that Wimbledon would not speak again, so he took out a small porcelain bottle from his pocket and was about to let him drink it, but he asked, "Curse, I curse you. I will wait for you in the depths of hell." His voice was getting weaker and weaker, and Maine had to concentrate to hear him clearly. Unfortunately, there is no hell in this world. Even if there is, it doesn't belong to us. And everything we do, is to continue. Only by unifying the 4 kingdoms can the church gather the greatest power to defeat the real enemy, otherwise. The bishop stopped here. He saw that Wimbledon's hand had already fallen, his head tilted to one side, and his chest had completely stopped moving. This is the ending of a king, but it is a new beginning for us, he thought. Chapter 86. Leaf didn't know how she had survived these days. It took her nearly half a month to return to the camp in the impassable mountain range from the barbarian land. In order to avoid the demonic beasts, she carefully hid in the thick trunk, and after confirming that there were no demonic beasts nearby, she went to the next place where she could hide. Although she was burning with anxiety, she had no other choice. Once she was discovered by the hybrid demonic beasts, she wouldn't be able to escape with her own strength. More than 10 sisters fell under the demon's slaughter, and the other sisters weren't good at fighting. When the Iron Hand demon jumped into the crowd and wantonly slaughtered, they scattered in all directions. But in the end, how many of them could return to the camp alive? Leaf had no idea. She didn't even dare to think about this terrible problem. Walking and hiding along the way consumed a lot of magic power. She could only walk a little more than 10 miles a day, and she also had to prepare the magic needed for the night. After eating up her dry food, she turned some wild fruits into food to quench her hunger and thirst. The Witch Cooperation Association's emblem had long lost its ability to keep warm, so she could only wrap herself in tree bark. Thinking of Sino, who died here before she was even a child, Leaf's tears couldn't stop falling. What's worse, on the 4th night, she faced the demon's bite in the trunk. A series of blows made her almost forget about it. A tearing pain suddenly bloomed from her chest and quickly spread to her whole body. For a moment, she almost lost consciousness. Biting her tongue until her mouth was full of blood, she gathered her spirit to resist the pain. Under the torture of the demon's bite, Leaf also thought of giving up, but thinking of the more than 20 sisters who might have survived, or were waiting for her return at the camp, or were seriously injured and needed her treatment and help, she clenched her teeth and persevered. Fortunately, the demon's bite didn't last long. When she broke free from the pain, her whole body was covered with cracks, and the inside of the trunk was wet with blood. In order to avoid attracting the demonic beasts with the smell of blood, she had to endure the pain, take off her clothes, and go to another big tree. At the same time, she let the bare branches grow green leaves, and the green leaves were made into clothes that could protect her from the cold. Under the guidance of magic, the branches became her needles, and the veins of the leaves were her threads. Along the way, she did not eat any cooked food or drink any hot water. After entering the impassable mountain range, even though she added 2 more layers of green leaves to her clothes and wrapped her hands and feet tightly, the rapidly falling temperature and the snow that covered her ankles still caused her toes to freeze. Just like that, she walked and stopped, dragging her numb feet, and finally returned to the camp. Seeing the familiar figures of her sisters, Leaf fell to the ground. When she woke up, it was already 2 days later. The long period of hypothermia had caused serious damage to her feet. Even herbal medicine could not stop the expanding gangrene. As a last resort, the sisters amputated 2 damaged toes of her left and right feet. Leaf didn't care too much. It was good enough that she survived. Compared to her sisters who would never come back, she was lucky enough. However, when he saw the white bandages wrapped around the arms of the people who were still alive, a great sorrow surged from the bottom of his heart. Of the 42 sisters who had set out, only 6 remained. After everyone comforted Leaf, Scroll, who was the oldest among them, told her about their experiences. While they were fighting with the devil, the non-combat witches took the opportunity to escape in the direction of the camp. That night, they encountered demonic beasts, a group of wild boars. Unable to resist, they had to flee in all directions. The group that had been hunted by the demonic beasts was obviously doomed, but they didn't have time to worry about it. The next morning, they were once again targeted by a wolf hybrid. This time, only 8 people escaped. Fortunately, after entering the impassable mountain range, the demonic beasts did not follow them. A few days after returning to the camp, the 2 sisters showed symptoms of magic bite. Perhaps it was because the Witch Cooperation Association had suffered too much this time, and the future was bleak. The two of them were unable to survive the demonic bite. But the combat witches did not return. Just when everyone thought that they had died in the hands of the devil, Leaf unexpectedly came back. So, what about the others? Red Pepper, Windchaser, and Mentor, how are they? Leaf shook her head. I'm the only one who survived. Is that so? Scroll replied softly. It was obvious that she had expected this answer. Then you should rest well. Anne. She hesitated. Leaf. What? When you were in a coma, we discussed it. If Kara does not come back, we hope that you can take over the position of mentor. Yi froze for a moment, then closed his eyes. Yes, the Witch Cooperation Association had suffered such a painful blow. If they did not elect a new leader, I'm afraid that they would immediately collapse. But the purpose of the Witch Cooperation Association was to find the Holy Mountain, to obtain freedom and a place of rest. Now the search for the Holy Mountain had disappeared. No, the Holy Mountain itself was a fraud. It did not exist in the impassable mountain range, nor did it exist in the barbarian land. So, was there any need for the Witch Cooperation Association to exist? Her heart was in a mess. Even if she did not look at them, she could feel the expectant eyes of her sisters. They needed someone to stand up and lead the confused people forward. We should go find Nightingale. After a long silence, Leaf said. What, find her? Do you mean go to Border Town? What if she lied to us? Vendi is also there. Maybe she is already dead. The sisters began to talk at once. Scroll clapped her hands to calm everyone down, and then asked Leaf, what if what Nightingale said is also a fraud? You can wait in a safe place outside the town. She opened her eyes. First let me find out the situation. If what she said is a lie, I will take over the position of mentor. If I die in the town, Scroll, you will lead the sisters to continue. But Leaf reluctantly smiled, I know that your ability is not suitable for fighting, and is not very helpful for the daily operation of the camp. But now I understand that the strength of a person's ability has nothing to do with the suitability of being a mentor. A mentor is a guide, not the strongest person. Unfortunately, I realized this too late. If the mentor of the Witch Cooperation Association was the patient and meticulous Vendi, would the outcome be completely different? You and Vendi are the first to join the Witch Cooperation Association, and you are also the elder of the sisters. From the east of the kingdom, you accompanied us to the impassable mountain range. You are experienced and cautious, everyone can see it. No one is more suitable than you to be the mentor of the sisters. Scroll was silent for a moment. What if what Nightingale said is true? Chapter 87. Ready dash. Stab. Vanner forcefully thrust the spear in his hand, and then his hands shook violently. The spear shaft made a cracking sound. A wolf was standing on the spearhead. Its fur was fluffy, and its blood-red eyes were as big as copper bells. It opened its mouth, revealing 2 rows of sharp teeth, the largest of which was as big as his thumb. It was the first time for him to be so close to a demonic beast. The wolf waved its claws in the air, and the snowflakes even splashed on his face. Vanner's mind went blank. He subconsciously clenched the spear shaft and continued to push forward according to the instinct accumulated in his training. One breath seemed to be extremely long. He saw that the spear shaft was bent to the limit, and the spearhead was deeply inserted into the belly of the demonic beast. He even thought that the next moment, the sharp claws would tear his cheeks. With a crack, the spear shaft could not bear the impact of the wolf and finally broke into 2. It was also this crisp sound that made the flow of time return to normal. The beast fell down just as it came, its claws fell on the wall, scraping a series of debris, and along with the half of the spear shaft, it fell heavily to the ground along the wall. Flintlock team, loading complete. Free shooting. Vanner immediately stretched out 2 barrels. He quickly took half a step back and raised his head to avoid the gunpowder fragments and gas rushing into his eyes. As for his ears, he had no time to care about them. The flintlock quickly finished firing. Vanner approached the wall again and found that a group of various demonic beasts had fallen under the wall. Someone beside him poked him. He turned his head and saw his roommate grinning proudly at him. He had only been using a gun for a little more than a week. What was there to be proud of? Vanner stared back at him and turned his eyes back to the battlefield. When His Highness artillery team comes in handy, you will realize that the iron pipe in your hand is just a crutch. Gunner, your gun, take it. Cat's Claw handed over a new wooden gun. Are these demonic beasts crazy? It's been 4 or 5 hours, right? They are crazy. Vanner set up the gun and waited for the enemy's next wave of attack. What time is it now? It's almost noon. Cat's Claw sighed and quickly looked around while the hunters were not paying attention. Where's Jop? Where's Rodney brother? Don't look away. Do you want to be cut open by the wolf? Vanner said grumpily. They were assigned to other sections of the city wall, maybe in Group 3 or Group 4. By the way, why are you in Group 1? I'm a substitute. He chuckled. I'll go wherever there's a need. An uncle was injured just now, and it's my turn to replace. Ready? The hunter observer's voice rang out, interrupting Cat's Claw. Vanner saw more than 10 demonic beasts rapidly approaching. Now he could quickly distinguish the different types of demonic beasts. There were only 2 wolves in this wave, and the rest were wild boars, foxes, and a bear. They were not a threat to the city wall. Stab! Even so, he still obeyed the command and stabbed with his spear together with his teammates. Sure enough, the spearhead was empty this time. He retracted his spear and saw that the wolf had been shot down by the other members of Team 1. When the rest of the slower demonic beasts had gathered at the foot of the city wall, the flintlock team squeezed to his side and fired freely. This fixed action had been repeated from dawn until now. When the horn was first blown, most of the people were still asleep. Vanner yawned. This time, the demonic beast's attack was fiercer than before. Usually, there would only be 1 or 2 waves of attacks, but now it was still continuing. The corpses of the demonic beasts under the city wall were almost piled up. Halfway through, he had been replaced by the 2nd militia team. After eating something and resting for a while, he went back to the city wall again. But unexpectedly, Vanner found that he was calmer than he had imagined. When he heard the command to stab, he put away his spear and left the rest to the flintlock team. At first, it seemed that there were some inexplicable regulations and movement requirements, but now they all came in handy and incredibly effective. The others were similar to him. Although they held the spear with both hands and looked quite serious, and some substitutes seemed very nervous, everyone stood straight and no one took a step back. But Vanner knew that their greatest confidence did not come from the daily practice, but from His Highness. Only after the flintlock team started shooting, Vanner secretly glanced at the watchtower in the middle of the city wall. That was where His Highness stood. From the moment the horn sounded, His Highness had arrived at the city wall and stood on the same line of defense as everyone else. Until now, he had not rested. Even when Vanner was rotated to eat, His Highness still stayed at the top of the watchtower, and his breakfast was personally sent by the chief knight. Thinking back, every year during the months of demons, the last lord would leave by ship. Next would be the nobles, and finally the civilians. If they had money, they could pay a few silver royals and leave by ship. If they had no money, they could only walk to Longsong's stronghold on their own feet. Thinking of this, Vanner felt full of strength. Yes, they were the troops of Prince Greycastle, and were completely different from the patrols in Border Town. Relying on their armors and weapons, they often ran amok in the old and new areas, and even extorted foreign merchants. In Vanner's view, except for the 2 captains of the patrols, the others were no different from hooligans. The militia was a strong team, and under the leadership of His Royal Highness, they were even able to block the demonic beasts outside of Border Town, never allowing them to take a single step forward. In the past, only Longsong's stronghold could do this. Look at Fishball, the famous coward in the old area, who was often ridiculed. After joining the second militia team, he was now able to hold a spear well. And then there was Fermi, who was huge, but always slow, and people in the old area liked to tease him. Now, his spear movements were fast and ruthless, and he was much more adept than most people. Vanner knew that after others finished their training, he would practice 100 more shots, because His Highness had told him, the more inflexible a bird is, the sooner it can fly, so that it can catch up with others and eventually surpass them. Obviously, at the beginning, it was only for the 2 eggs, but now he felt lucky that he had joined the militia. Every day there was a slight change, and every day he was better than yesterday. Vanner believed that it was not only him, everyone felt this. He did not know how to describe his mood. Perhaps, it could be summarized as what His Highness often said during training: they were a team that was different from the times. Woo, woo dash, 2 short horn sounds made Vanner excited. This was an early warning of the appearance of a hybrid demonic beast. He looked into the distance and saw a hybrid with a lion's head and wings, very similar to the one that broke into the city last time. This is the second one we met today, he thought, but this time it was different. In addition to the Flintlock team, they had other helpers. Chapter 88. Don't be so anxious, it hasn't come yet. Roland looked at the eager lightning inside. Only God knew that she was so interested in challenging the demonic beasts. She was obviously not the type that was suitable for fighting, but she didn't have any fear of the demonic beasts. Follow the way you dealt with the first one. Don't try to be brave. You just need to lure the demonic beast and focus its attention on you. Pay attention to maintain a high altitude. Although it can't fly, it's still quite threatening when it jumps. I know, Lightning said confidently. When the first one came, I already knew its strength. Don't worry, it can't even touch the corner of my clothes. During the conversation, the hybrid demonic beast had already approached the city wall, crossed an obstacle area, and jumped towards the unguarded area, flipping over the wall. But this time, no militia members paid attention to it. They still stayed in their defensive area, waiting for the next assassination order from the Hunter Observer. So, the special operation against the hybrid demonic beast now begins. Roland said in a deep voice. Lightning, who had already flown out, stopped and looked back at Roland. What's wrong? What you said. Lightning thought for a moment, then shook her head. It's a bit strange. Forget it, I'm leaving. Looking at the little girl's quickly disappearing figure, Roland smiled awkwardly and asked Anna and Nightingale behind him, do you also think it's strange? Yes. Both of them nodded. Well, it seems that even in a different world, the lines of a Chinibyu are still Chinibyu. Then you also go, pay attention to your safety. Your Highness, you too. Nightingale bowed, then took Anna's hand and entered the fog. Roland put his hands behind his back and stood against the wind, trying to act like a big boss. He knew that many people would secretly look back at him during the battle, so even though his feet were numb, he still stood at the highest point of the city wall, so that everyone could see that the prince was with them at any time. Since he couldn't personally participate in the battle, he could at least use this way to motivate people. This time, the demonic beast's attack had exceeded the intensity of any previous attack. According to Iron Axe, in the previous years during the months of the demons, only 1 or 2 demonic hybrids would appear, but this year, Border Town had already encountered 4 demonic hybrids. The demonic beasts continued to emerge from the concealing forest in batches of dozens of beasts, constantly rushing towards the city wall. Fortunately, in the past month, the production of flintlocks had increased greatly. Right now, a team of 100 flintlocks had been fully equipped. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to maintain such an efficient killing speed. If it was a crossbow, it would be difficult to load it. In a protracted battle, the advantage of a firearm in consuming little stamina would become increasingly obvious. Of course, the rapid increase in the consumption of gunpowder was enough to give Roland a headache. He was already considering dismantling the 20 or so bags of explosives in the warehouse, retrieving the gunpowder for the firearm squad. On the other side, lightning had already flown over the head of the hybrid demonic beast. She took a stone from her pocket and threw it at the demonic beast. The stone accurately fell on its head. This sudden attack made it fiercely retreat, only to discover that the attack had come from the air. Lightning provocatively lowered her altitude and passed in front of it, flying close to the ground towards the center of the town. Although the hybrid demonic beast had a certain ability to think, the little girl in front of it was obviously not a threat. It immediately swooped down, spread its wings, and with a few leaps, glided nearly 100 meters. Lightning immediately pulled herself up, turned around in the air, bypassed several bungalows, and turned into another street. In this way, after several turns, she lured the demonic beast to the central square of the town, which was also the place where she and Nightingale had agreed to attack. Because the hybrid demonic beast had a very sensitive sense of smell, it could even detect Nightingale in the fog. Therefore, before Nightingale and Anna launched their attack, Roland had to try to distract the demonic beast as much as possible. But Lightning had done it perfectly. The hybrid was now obviously in a rage, and its increasingly manic bestial nature had covered up what little reason it had. It opened its mouth wide and jumped several times into the air, but Lightning, who did not have any weight on her body, was far more flexible than the demonic beast. She teased the hybrid up and down, making every time it jumped up, it would fail. Nightingale had also arrived at the square from another direction. Unlike Lightning, after entering the fog, she completely ignored the houses and fences on the road and moved forward in a straight line. The distance of Anna's flame was only 10 steps, 5 meters, so she had to approach the demonic beast from behind to reduce the possibility of being discovered by the demonic beast. There were a lot of mistakes when dealing with the first hybrid, but now Nightingale was completely familiar with Anna's attack style. When she was only 30 steps away from the demonic beast, she raised her speed to the limit. The ground seemed to be shortened in an instant, and she almost crossed the remaining distance in one step. When Anna came back to her senses, the monster's tail was almost touching her face. "Now!" Nightingale shouted. The black and white world around Anna receded like the tide, and in the blink of an eye, she returned to the familiar town square. The green flame quietly appeared on her fingertips, and then expanded into a huge flame cage, covering the demonic beast. Nightingale quickly retreated, the rolling heatwave hitting her face had already made her feel a burning pain. In the heat that could melt steel, the demonic beast didn't even have the time to struggle, and turned into a fireball, crashing to the ground. "It seems that they have solved it," said Vendi, who replaced Nightingale as the temporary guard, when she saw the rising green flame in the distance, curled her lips and said, "It seems that I didn't play any role. If possible, I hope that you don't have to go to the battlefield," said Roland, still standing with his hands behind his back, pretending to be relaxed. Even so, he knew that today, if there were no witches to join the defense line to assist in the battle, in the face of the hybrid demonic beast that could fly over the city wall, the militia would inevitably be in chaos. Even Nana had come to the city wall, and under the protection of Baron Sur, she quickly treated the wounded soldiers. This was the first time that Roland had revealed the power of the witches in front of all the militia members, and the result made him very happy. In the militia, Nana, who was known as the Angel of Healing, had obviously raised the reputation of the witches to a new height. After Anna and Nightingale joined hands to kill the first hybrid on the city wall, the crowd burst into cheers. Of course, he knew that it was impossible for everyone to not care about this, and such a situation was very rare. After the militia had a preliminary consensus, his next plan would be much easier to implement. Suddenly, the gunshots on the city wall became sparse, and Roland noticed that the demonic beasts began to withdraw from the city wall. They actually retreated. He couldn't believe his eyes. At this moment, a ray of light pierced through the thick clouds in the sky and sprinkled onto the ground, followed by a second ray, a third ray. Very soon, the dusky sky was riddled with holes by the millions of rays of light. All the rays of light fused into one, becoming dazzling and indescribable. The earth suddenly brightened. When the sun rises again, it will be the end of the months of demons. There was a brief silence on the city wall, and then a wave of cheers swept through the border defense line. Gradually, the townspeople also came out of their houses and shouted. They cheered for the long-lost sunshine, for their safe winter, and for their prince. All the voices finally converged into a torrent, resounding throughout Border Town. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.